Chapter 1691. But no matter how vague it was, it could not change reality. 2/3 of Nanxing had fallen into the hands of the enemy, leaving her and her child with only 1/3 of the territory and the barren land of the southern barbarians. Now, they had to face the pressure of the enemy. It was hard to say if they could keep this bit of territory. 2/3 of Nanxing was in the hands of the enemy, leaving her and her child with only 1/3 of the territory and the barren land of the southern barbarians. The current situation was set up by that bastard Hua Yuan. He should have a backup plan, right? The Xichang Emperor's concubine felt uneasy. She had sacrificed everything in exchange for a few short months of peace. She did not want to go back to her days of wandering. As the Emperor's concubine, she was born into a noble family. How could she live a life worse than that of a commoner? And Shui was dead. The only person she could rely on was Hua Yuan. Little did she know that the outside world was also in a mess. The complexity of the situation was not something a woman trapped in the inner courtyard like her could imagine. In order to eliminate dissidents, Hua Yuan had secretly forced many people to die. These people had discovered the abnormality of the rations, but could not find the culprit. As a result, they alerted the enemy and ended up on Hua Yuan's death list. No one knew that Hua Yuan's personality had changed greatly recently. He was not just irritable and easily whipped to death servants who made mistakes. On the day the young master committed suicide, Hua Yuan's main personality was awake for a short period of time, but it was quickly suppressed by the split, Lu Shi. From then on, the frequency of the main personality's awakening increased, but it was still very short, so short that it was not enough for the main personality to commit suicide. When the secondary personality realized this, he began to doubt himself uncontrollably, causing his condition to worsen. In the end, he even had auditory, visual, smell, taste, and touch hallucinations. It was so severe that he could not distinguish reality from hallucinations. Sometimes he laughed excitedly, sometimes he was irritable, sometimes he was sad, sometimes he was anxious and depressed. Even his dream of hegemony lost its motivation. It was as if there was a voice in his heart telling him over and over again that this world was boring and that fighting for hegemony was useless. He was alone, but he could hear all sorts of noises. There were women calling him, men laughing and scolding by his ear, and the young master who had passed away happily called him teacher, in a childish voice. He could still hear Enchui calling his name in a dignified voice in his dreams, and people he didn't know chattered by his ear without end. In a trance, he might see a familiar person waving at him from the end of the road, but when he washed his hands with cold water, he felt like he was being burned. He insisted that the basin of cold water was not cold water, but a basin of charcoal, that there were other people in the room besides him and his attendants, that it was not a sunny day outside, but a storm and lightning. But the attendants who served him looked shocked and frightened, as if he had said something terrible. Hua Yuan insisted that he was right, so the servant who refuted him was naturally wrong. An inexplicable anger dyed his eyes red. When he came back to his senses, the servant was lying on the ground in a bloody mess, without a sound. In his hand, he was holding the whip that had caused his attendant's skin and flesh to split open. The whip was so deep that the bone could be seen. Bright red blood flowed down to his feet. The socks under his feet were full of the attendant's blood, and every step he took left a pair of bloody footprints. Hua Yuan resisted this strange version of himself. He was Lu Shi, the Lu Shi of Hejin County, not a lunatic with a clear mind. The more he denied it, the more frequent the hallucinations became. Once, when he was dealing with government affairs, he suddenly smelled something burning. When he looked up, he saw the red flames engulfing the house. He shouted, "The water is on fire," and hurriedly ran out of the fire, but the people who heard the news said that there was no fire. It was still daytime, and the candles were not lit. It was raining heavily outside, so how could there be a fire? Hua Yuan was stunned, and his face turned pale. He tried to cover up the matter, saying that he was frightened by a nightmare. That night, he dreamed of a person he hadn't thought of for a long time, Lu Jing. In the dream, he and Lu Jing were arguing fiercely, replaying the scene of their confrontation that year. Lu Jing questioned him. His every word was powerful and resonant. Do you really think you are Lu Shi? You are just a figment of Hua Yuan's imagination after he lost his mind. Hua Yuan was so angry that he wanted to pull out a knife and chop Lu Zheng's mouth. If you are Lu Shi, why don't you think about your experience since you were young? Hua Yuan refused to admit it. Although his memory of the past was very blurry, he thought that it was because he woke up in a stranger's body. As long as he took back his body and identity, everything would get better. You say you are Lu Shi, then do you remember that when I was studying in Langya County, I drank with you at the mountain gazing pavilion? What did you and I talk about in that pavilion? You can't answer because you are not Lu Shi. You are Hua Yuan, from Nanxing Ningzhou. No. Hua Yuan clenched his molars and silently refuted Lu Zhang's bewitching words. You have parents, older brothers, twin brothers, who died young, parents, passed away due to an epidemic. Your property was taken away by your uncle and aunt. They raised you. You are, weak and married, a slut. This woman had an affair and gave birth to a son and a daughter, however, the other party was relentless. His voice was like the ubiquitous air and the most vicious curse, firmly occupying Hua Yuan's ears. You are not Lu Shi at all. You are a lunatic who has lost his mind but doesn't know who he is. I am not. Hua Yuan roared as he sat up straight. The sleeping clothes he was wearing were already drenched in sweat, and his long hair seemed to have been scooped out of the water. I am not. I am not. I am not. He grabbed the sword on the shelf and pulled it out with a swoosh. He waved it everywhere as if he had gone mad. The servants on night watch outside heard the commotion and did not dare to enter the room to take a look. When the sun rose the next day, the servant heard the commotion in the room and finally opened the door with trembling hands. Hua Yuan's bedroom had been smashed to pieces, and almost nothing in the room was intact. The servant's heart trembled as he carefully looked for Hua Yuan. In the end, he found the other party in white sleeping clothes walking out of the corner. He was so scared that his eyes almost rolled back. When is it? Hua Yuan looked dispirited and his voice was hoarse. He looked like he had overindulged after taking a few women at night. Seeing that Hua Yuan was still conscious, the servant whispered, "It was just the beginning of the morning." The beginning of the morning. That was still very early. Hua Yuan asked the servant to prepare hot water for him to wash up and change his clothes. After eating breakfast, he went to work. He had not even warmed his seat when he received the news that Enchui had died. Enchui had died, logically speaking, Enchui was Hua Yuan's imaginary enemy. Hua Yuan should be cheering in his heart even if he did not show any joy on his face. In the end, is there a leak in the room? He looked up. The roof was fine. Chapter 1692. The Lord was dead, and the young Lord was gone. And Shui's other relatives had all died in the Nanman disaster. Faced with this situation, everyone wanted to curse in their hearts. Whether it was them or Enchui when he was alive, who hadn't privately mocked Jiang Pingji that she was destined to be taken advantage of. Some people even thought maliciously that if Jiang Pingji collapsed in the middle of the road and all her hegemony would end up benefiting others, would she come back to life from anger when she saw this in the netherworld? They used this as evidence to demonstrate the inferiority of female feudal officials, once again confirming that the existence of female feudal officials was unreasonable. In the end, after many years, Jiang Pingji, who still had 0 children, was still alive and kicking, able to fight, write, and smile. What about Enchui? Enchui was dead, and the heir who was about to come of age was gone. His hegemony was about to end. Oh, that was not right. The Xichang princess still had Enchui's posthumous child in her womb, so it could not be considered as the end of the line yet. However, what use could a baby who was not yet born and whose gender was unknown be? Could it be that they should work together to resist foreign enemies and wait for the child to be born before worshipping him as master? From the child's birth to adulthood, it would be a full 20 years. The key was that the child's aptitude was unknown. The late Lord Enchui passed away suddenly, and he did not have the chance to appoint a minister to entrust the child to before he died. Hearing this, perhaps someone would ask questions in a good mood. Didn't Enchui think highly of Hua Yuan, then Lu Jing? If he were to choose who to entrust the child to, these two would undoubtedly be the first choice. That being said, if Enchui did not personally appoint them, who would be convinced? Even a fool would know that whoever became the minister would temporarily exercise authority on behalf of the Lord. He was not a feudal official, but he was better than a feudal official. If the minister was more ambitious, it was possible to seize power and occupy the late lord's estate. Even if Enchui's estate was in a precarious state, it could not stop the greed of people. In the face of a big enough temptation, there would always be people who liked to abandon their brains and choose to think with their bare eyes. With both external and internal troubles, the Xichang princess, who thought she was in a stable position, panicked. Once the news of Enchui's death came, the wife of the minister who attended to her every day did not come, as if they had a tacit understanding. Not only that, but the servants who served her were also somewhat neglectful. They were not as careful as before. This gave the Xichang princess an ominous feeling. With a big belly, she visited Hua Yuan in the middle of the night to find a solution. In the end, she didn't see Hua Yuan. Instead, she saw her brother. After Xichang's Empress concubine successfully got pregnant, the siblings reduced their private interactions. Although the royal family often did dirty things, it did not mean that the members of the royal family could accept the siblings without any grudges. The Xichang imperial concubine was rather disgusted by this matter. If not for the sake of survival and long-term considerations, she would not have easily compromised with Hua Yuan. Meeting again after several months, the atmosphere between the brother and sister was a little strange. However, no matter how awkward it was not as important as her own life. Xichang's Empress concubine hurriedly asked her brother. The Prince of Xichang looked much healthier than the last time they met. However, he had not rested well in recent days and looked listless. I'm afraid we've fallen into Hua Yuan's trap. The Prince of Xichang looked at his sister sorrowfully with a heavy sense of exhaustion. Emperor concubine Xichang's heart tightened. A trap. Why? She stared at her brother's mouth, worried that he would say something despairing. We were too naive at the time and underestimated the viciousness of the human heart. That's why we were deceived by Hua Yuan's flowery words, the Prince of Xichang said tiredly. Enchui is dead. The young master is dead. Other than the one in your womb, Enchui does not have a single bloodline on the surface. Logically speaking, everyone should treat this bloodline as their master and let Hua Yuan be an important minister. Hua Yuan will be able to rightfully control power through you and your child. Although she would be a puppet by doing this, at least she would not have to worry about food and clothing. In the future, when her child grew up, Xichang's Empress concubine could use their mother-son relationship to pull her child to her side. She could work hard to make Hua Yuan a mere figurehead and burn the bridge after crossing it. In the end, she would be able to make a comeback. Xichang's Empress concubine was stunned. She pretended to be calm. Isn't that the case? This plan seems to be going smoothly, but in reality, there are 3 prerequisites. What prerequisites? First, the power that Enchui left behind must be strong enough to last until your son grows up. Xichang's Empress concubine was speechless. With Enchui's death, his power was on the verge of collapse. The enemy would not let go of such a good opportunity to beat him while he was down. Even though she was a woman from the inner courtyard, she knew that this matter was very dangerous. If she continued to struggle, even 2 years would be difficult, much less 20 years. Second, Enchui appointed Hua Yuan as an important minister. Everything is in the open. Xichang's Empress concubine gritted her teeth. But that person is already dead. He left nothing behind. Enchui had died too quickly. Not only had he buried hundreds of thousands of soldiers with him, he had not left behind any arrangements for a successor. No, I still have this. The Empress concubine caressed her belly as if she was clutching at her last straw. The prince asked her, "Who says that Enchui's bloodline will definitely inherit Enchui's legacy?" The Empress concubine was stunned by the question. "You say someone will usurp the throne." The prince sighed. Since ancient times, there have been many magnanimous dukes who, for the sake of the bigger picture, entrusted their legacy to important ministers. That's how it was recorded in the history books, and it led to a beautiful conversation between ruler and minister. Of course, there are also those who are thick-skinned enough to openly usurp power under the banner of completing the unfinished ambitions of the previous ruler. You and I were too naive before. It's too late to understand now. Top tacticians could understand the details immediately, but the siblings did not have the brains and carelessly fell into Hua Yuan's trap. The Empress concubine's face paled. And third, Enchui's old ministers are loyal enough. They will not harm you and your son for their own selfish desires. This was very difficult. These old ministers were already restless. Although they did not put their selfish desires on the surface, they still gave themselves away. The Xichang prince had thought that the first person to become restless would be Hua Yuan. He had not expected it to be Enchui's other old ministers. These old ministers usually did not have much of a presence, but they were experienced and had outstanding family backgrounds. They belonged to the hidden faction of power. On the other hand, Hua Yuan, this guy had not made a move. It was really illogical. At present, the greatest danger that Xichang's Empress concubine and her son faced was not from Hua Yuan, but from those old ministers who coveted Enchui's legacy. The siblings had thought of things as a matter of course. When the truth was laid out in front of them, they were all dumbfounded. When Xichang's Empress concubine heard this, her delicate body could not help but tremble. She asked him in a sobbing voice. "Royal brother, then what should we do?" The prince was also in despair. "Right now, the only one who can protect us is Hua Yuan, but he," the Empress concubine hurriedly asked, "what happened to him?" "Ever since he lost his student, his mind has not been very clear. He often speaks crazily and whips people at the slightest provocation," the Empress concubine said in shock. "How could this be? That young master was personally plotted against and forced to death by him. Now he's acting crazily. What was he doing earlier?" The prince shook his head. "I don't know." Chapter 1693. Could it be that he wants to play the fool and take advantage of everyone's fight, causing both sides to suffer, and then reap the benefits? Based on Hua Yuan's past behavior, this guess was not without reason. By doing so, he could easily exhaust the siblings to death, and he could borrow the hands of others to eradicate the bloodline in the Empress concubine's womb. In the end, he could stand out at the crucial moment and use the crime of harming the deceased lord's child to get rid of the ambitious competitor. After all these twists and turns, Hua Yuan would still be the winner. If that's the case, then Hua Yuan's schemes are too terrifying. He's included almost everyone. The Empress concubine's guess was not without reason. Even the Xichang prince was convinced by her, but there was one thing he did not understand. But what benefits does he gain by doing this? The Empress concubine was stunned. She could not understand this question either. If Hua Yuan wanted to seize power, he had other ways to get rid of Enchui and preserve his troops. He would not let Jiang Pingji take advantage of him. In the end, Hua Yuan did not use the best of both worlds method and chose a method that harmed others without benefiting himself. The death of Hua Yuan would also cause the death of hundreds of thousands of soldiers. The rear had rations, but not enough troops. How could they defend against the enemy? The enemy they were about to face was not an ordinary small fry. She was a veteran who had dominated the chaotic world for more than a decade. How was Hua Yuan so confident that he could defeat Jiang Pingji with his current forces? After thinking for a long time, the Empress concubine lowered her eyes and said sarcastically, "Forget it. How can normal people like us figure out the thoughts of a madman?" This topic was temporarily put aside. The most important thing now was to protect themselves and not to explore Hua Yuan's thoughts. In reality, the siblings were afraid of being tricked by Hua Yuan. They had subconsciously turned Hua Yuan into an omnipotent figure. How could Hua Yuan not be able to divine something that they all understood? There was a saying that went, "Man proposes, but God disposes." Who could truly predict everything? Hua Yuan's calculations were very thorough, but there were too many variables. The enemy was too strong, and Enchui was too smart, and Enchui had misjudged him. All sorts of variables converged together, resulting in this quantitative change that no one could have predicted. The Empress concubine stroked her round belly and sighed. Even if we know we've been tricked by Hua Yuan, what can we do? In the end, we still have to rely on him. This was the most ironic part. On one hand, they hated Hua Yuan, but on the other hand, they had no choice but to attach themselves to him for some security. The Empress concubine lowered her head, and naturally didn't see the prince's complicated expression and the humiliation he was bitterly suppressing. The atmosphere between the brother and sister was strangely stagnant. They looked at each other and tacitly avoided the common wound in their hearts. The prince said, "We were counting on him, but he wanted to abandon us." The Empress concubine wasn't discouraged. "Convince him, and we still have a chance to live. Everything has to be tried to know the result." None of the old officials Enchui had left behind were reliable. When the Empress concubine thought of this, she gnashed her teeth in hatred. Enchui had died not long ago. His corpse hadn't even gotten cold, yet these old officials were already impatiently fighting for power. Not only that, but they also wanted to harm their lord's posthumous child. Such a despicable act was simply unheard of. "I can't see him either. These few days." The Xichang prince shook his head. He suddenly thought of something and said unwillingly, "These 2 days, Hua Yuan's whereabouts are a mystery. He's pretending to be crazy again, and no one is keeping a close eye on him. Who knows where Hua Yuan ran off to? Sometimes he's crazy, and sometimes he's sober. He doesn't even recognize the old servant that has served him for many years. I've tried to visit him several times, but he's been blocked outside." The Xichang prince who lived in Hua Yuan's manor hadn't even seen him, much less the Xichang Empress concubine. The Empress concubine's face was deathly pale. "Is Hua Yuan sincerely avoiding us and refusing to see us? If Hua Yuan really did close the door and refused to see them, didn't that mean he was determined to abandon them and watch them die?" The prince was hesitant. The Empress concubine said, "Imperial brother, if you have something to say, just say it. At this time, there's no need to avoid it. We can't rely on Hua Yuan, but there's one person who might be able to help us. At the very least, he can protect you and your mother's lives." When the Empress concubine heard this, her amorous eyes lit up. She hastily asked who it was. The prince spoke of a person the Empress concubine didn't expect. He said, Lu Jing, Lu Xiaoyin. This person was originally Enchui's most valued strategist in the early days. Later, Hua Yuan fought with him, and he lost. That's why he lost favor with Enchui. Even so, Lu Jing still has some prestige in Enchui's camp. If he's willing to protect the late master and Chui's posthumous son, you and your mother will most likely be able to survive this calamity. The Empress concubine didn't know much about Lu Jing. She only knew that he existed, but she hadn't had much contact with him. Will that work? The Empress concubine hesitated. She was afraid of jumping out of Hua Yuan's pit and into another pit. The prince said, I've asked around in private. Lu Jing was of humble birth, but his character is respectable. He doesn't have the disdainful flaws of those poor scholars. And Chui treated him so well, yet he never changed his mind and submitted to anyone else. He's clearly a loyal and devoted person. And Chui is already dead. No matter how he disheartened Lu Jing when he was alive, he's already dead. How could Lu Jing vent his anger on an innocent posthumous son? If you ask him for help, there's at least a 70% chance that he'll protect you and your mother, if not 100%. The Empress concubine was tempted by his words. However, the Xichang royal siblings would never have guessed that Lu Jing had already disappeared from their investigations. And Chui's army had been defeated and killed. There had indeed been a small group of defeated soldiers who'd escaped by relying on tree bark and wild vegetables. They'd been starving along the way. Lu Jing wasn't among this group of people. The Xichang Empress concubine didn't give up. She sent people to inquire again and finally found news of Lu Jing. 1 or 2 days before Enchui's death, Lu Jing had fallen seriously ill and was sent to a nearby village to recuperate. He'd most likely either died of illness or starvation by now. Her last hope was shattered. In her despair, the Xichang Empress concubine moved the fetus. The doctor diagnosed that there were signs of a miscarriage. In order to protect the only trump card in her belly, she didn't dare to make any more trouble. She lay in bed for several days to recuperate. The Xichang siblings were no longer causing trouble. Hua Yuan was crazy and didn't care about anything. The other old officials fought for power and negotiated at the same time. Everything was a mess. When Enchui's power was at its peak, he wasn't Jiang Pingji's match. Now that he was half dead, he obviously didn't have the ability to resist. Seeing that the war was going smoothly, she handed over the responsibility of the various battlefields to the other generals. She sat in the middle of the army and her days were leisurely. When the days were leisurely, she naturally had more time to do more things. For example, torturing the noobs. It wasn't that she was complaining, but Lu Zheng's chess skills were really bad. Lu Zheng was speechless. First, Wei Ci held his hand to discuss a game, then he was pressed down by Jiang Pingji in front of the chessboard for a friendly exchange. Chapter 1694. Lu Zheng was not the type of person who would sit and wait for death. It was just that he was old now, and his words were not as sharp and straightforward as when he was young. Therefore, he mocked Jiang Pingji for not winning against Enchui honorably, saying that it was all because of Enchui's incompetent teammates that she could achieve what she had today. Jiang Pingji twirled the chess pieces and thought about her next move so that LV Jing would lose more rhythmically. I didn't plan to spy around, and she thought that LV Jing was mocking her for using spying to trick Enchui. Even though this was a normal battle maneuver, and it wasn't a low-level one, she wouldn't admit that she hadn't done it before. Lu Jing thought of the annoying Hua Yuan and the even more annoying Lu Shi personality. He sneered and said nothing. You're the only one I know among Andy's bunch of crooks. You can't be a spy that I sent, and I didn't do such a thing. Jiang Pingji defended herself and ridiculed Lu Jing at the same time. She continued, besides, luck is also a part of one's strength. If he really wants to blame someone, he can only blame Enchui for not being able to see through people and trusting the wrong person. How can he blame me for being too powerful and having a keen eye? Lu Zheng, sure enough, it was a familiar taste, a familiar venomous tongue, and a familiar narcissism. It's not anyone else. It's Hua Yuan. To prevent Jiang Pingji from continuing to be narcissistic and disgusting, he chose to take the initiative to explain. Jiang Pingji was astonished. She had a very good memory, so she naturally knew who Hua Yuan was. Wasn't he that unlucky guy with schizophrenia? Xiaoyin, I don't understand what you're saying. I've only met Hua Yuan once. What can I possibly instigate in him? In the past, Hua Yuan represented Enchui and formed an alliance with Jiang Pingji. They only met once. What could Jiang Pingji do in such a short time? Lu Zheng sighed and said, Hua Yuan has gone mad. A good counselor turned out to be a lunatic. It really made people sigh. Jiang Pingji vaguely felt that the words sounded familiar. She secretly glanced at Wei Ci. Wei Ci had said something similar to her before. I know that. I had a feeling when I first met him. His mind was a little abnormal. But so what? He lost his mind and imagined himself to be Lu Shi. He imagined himself to be you, so how could he sincerely assist Enchui? Jiang Pingji's hand paused. What kind of personality did this lunatic split into? LV Jing did not understand, so Jiang Pingji changed the way she asked. I mean, who does Hua Yuan think he is? LV Jing didn't say anything. He just silently looked at her. The meaning was clear. After Jiang Pingji recovered from her shock, she quickly accepted the setting. So what? Without Hua Yuan, I'll be able to take down Enchui within the year. Lu Zheng said faintly. Arrogant and conceited. If Hua Yuan had not interfered, Lu Zheng would have been the one assisting Enchui. Would he allow Jiang Pingji to destroy the Enchui line of defense within a year and conquer the entire territory? Jiang Pingji smiled. This is called knowing one's limitations. I never exaggerate my abilities. Lu Zheng could not help but roll his eyes. Although Lu Shi's personality had only been online for a short period of time, his destructive power was very strong. He still insisted that Jiang Pingji had won with the help of the enemy's stupid teammates. Little did he know that Lu Zheng was holding on to Wei Ci's script in this life. Wei Ci could pat his chest and guarantee that in his previous life, Her Majesty had won against Nanxing without doing anything. In his previous life, Enchui had insisted on using all his troops to wipe out the 4 factions of Nanman. He had won, but his strength had been greatly damaged. In the end, Her Majesty, his neighbor, had picked up the spoils. Wherever the army passed, there was almost no decent resistance. They were like a hot knife through butter, and they had forced Enchui to his death. Recently, Wei Ci had rarely thought about his previous life. Now that he looked back, he realized that his old master Enchui had not lived as well as he had in his previous life. In his previous life, he had at least committed suicide with dignity. In this life, he had been forced to the altar and killed by his lord. After placing the chess piece, Jiang Pingji asked LV Jing, did Hua Yuan do anything disgusting? Although it was a personality created by Hua Yuan, this personality called himself Lu Shi. Whenever she thought of what disgusting things he had done with this identity, Jiang Pingji felt uneasy. It did not cause her any substantial harm, but it was disgusting. As soon as she asked, she remembered something. She had previously received information that one of the siblings from the Xichang royal family whom she had chased away had been kept by Enchui, and the other had been given to Hua Yuan as a reward. In an instant, Jiang Pingji's face turned green. She wanted to kill Hua Yuan with her own hands, and no one could stop her. Unexpectedly, Just as Jiang Pingji had made up her mind to kill Hua Yuan had disappeared. She was not mistaken, he had disappeared. At first, no one paid much attention to it, but when the old housekeeper realized that his master had not returned for 2 consecutive days, he sent someone to the magistrate's office to inquire. Only after asking did he find out that they had not seen Hua Yuan for a day or 2. The servant's heart thumped, and he hurriedly passed the news to the old housekeeper. All the servants and maids in the manor were sent out to search. They inquired along the way, and after a thorough search, they finally found some clues. Some people who had witnessed it said that someone who looked like Hua Yuan had staggered out of the north of the city. They searched along the way, but they soon lost track of him. Only then did everyone realize a serious problem. Hua Yuan did not seem to be pretending to be crazy. He was really crazy. What should we do now? Not only were the servants and maids in Hua Yuan's manor panicking, but Hua Yuan's former colleagues were also panicking. Those old foxes who had been fighting openly and covertly even stopped fighting. They knew how much the late Lord, Enchanting, valued Hua Yuan. The latter held considerable military power. If they wanted to gather their troops and work together to resist the invading Jiang Pingji, Hua Yuan could not be lost. Now that Hua Yuan had gone completely crazy, what could they do if he left them behind? What else can we do? Search. I don't believe that we can't find him even if we dig 3 feet into the ground. Heaven always failed those who tried. After half a month, they still could not find Hua Yuan's whereabouts. Instead, they found a lot of specious clues. They sent people to search, but they found nothing every time. They went around in circles, almost turning the ground upside down, but they did not even see Hua Yuan's shadow. To be honest, if not for the fact that Hua Yuan had really gone crazy, they would have suspected that this was another trap set by Hua Yuan. With so many internal troubles and endless external troubles, they could only temporarily put aside the matter of Hua Yuan's disappearance and focus on fighting the enemy. However, Jiang Pingji did not care whether they were ready to fight or not. She fought wherever she went, and she did not stop along the way. She was like a hot knife through butter. The old officials in Enchanting's camp were not blind. In fact, they were better at protecting themselves than anyone else. Seeing that the situation was hopeless and that Jiang Pingji was destined to win, they planned to lead their troops and surrender before Jiang Pingji used force to break open the city gates. Was surrendering something shameful? Of course not. This was called obeying fate. Autumn had just arrived that year, and the city gates of Enchanting's old nest were open to welcome the new lord. To show their sincerity, they presented Jiang Pingji with a gift that had a special meaning. Looking at the Xichang princess's pregnant belly, which was about to give birth, Jiang Pingji's expression changed. Using a pregnant woman and a posthumous child of the late lord to ask for credit from the new lord was really a cunning move. Chapter 1695. Who is this? The Xichang emperor's concubine was already very pregnant. Her stomach was so heavy that she needed to support it with both hands to feel better. Jiang Pingji pretended not to recognize her, but the salted fish in the streaming room really could not. Jingguangxingji ji, this lady looks familiar, but I can't remember where I've seen her before. Does anyone remember her? Candy Factory, she looks familiar too. Although she's very swollen during pregnancy, her facial features are quite beautiful. Her actual appearance should be pretty good, right? The number of pretty girls in the streaming room can be counted on one hand. With such good looks, she shouldn't be unknown. The power of 5 million salted fishes was not to be underestimated. There were always a few salted fishes with better memories. Host marry me, wait, I remember now. No wonder she looks familiar. She seems to be the Xichang emperor's concubine. Someone recalled it and gave a hint, but most of the salted fish were still in a state of confusion. Who was the Xichang Emperor's concubine? Was she famous? However, just by hearing the title, Emperor's Concubine, one could tell that she came from a noble background and had an extraordinary status. After following the map, everyone finally matched the Xichang Emperor's concubine with some memories that were thrown in a corner. Many people suddenly realized that it was her. 200 kilograms salted fish, the Xichang Emperor's concubine. I have some impression of this woman. How did she become like this? Back then, there was a salted fish who participated in Dream of 1,000 Years and became the guard that escorted the Xichang Emperor's concubine and the Xichang prince. The salted fish in the streaming room also saw the fairy-like siblings through the perspective of Dream of 1,000 Years. They both had faces that made people want to fall in love at first sight. It had only been a year since they last saw each other. How did the Xichang Emperor's concubine become like this? Actually, it was not difficult to guess. The Xichang Emperor's concubine was now Enchui's concubine. She was pregnant with Enchui's posthumous child. She was considered a rather special prisoner of war. Jiang Pingji did not intend to make things difficult for her, but she could not stop a few of Enchui's former officials from taking a shortcut. They took the initiative to present the Xichang Emperor's concubine to take credit and flatter her. Pregnancy was a very difficult matter. Xichang's Empress concubine's pregnancy was not very stable. In addition, she was constantly worried that her child's bloodline would be exposed, so her pregnancy was even more difficult. So many changes had happened in the past few months that she was on tenterhooks even in her dreams. As a result, she looked haggard and old. Her face was swollen several times, and the fat piled up on her double chin. Her thick neck made her collarbone disappear, and her red phoenix eyes were squinted. Where was the fairy-like face that made people fall in love at first sight? If it weren't for the fact that his facial features still had traces of being at the peak of his attractiveness, even if 5 million salted fish gathered together, they wouldn't be able to guess who he was. Without batting an eyelid, Jiang Pingji took the initiative to present the surrendered officials of the Xichang Emperor concubine as an explanation. This person was originally a concubine of the Xichang royal family. She was later taken in as a concubine by the late Lord Enchui. The child in her womb is the late Lord's posthumous child. Hearing the surrendered officials say this, the expressionless Xichang Emperor concubine finally reacted. She covered her face with her empty hand as though she could not bear it. Jiang Pingji looked away. Enchui's posthumous son. I thought that you would care about the relationship between the ruler and the subject and preserve the last of his bloodline. The expressions of the surrendered officials suddenly changed, as if they had been painted with a thick layer of white paint. They'd only heard that Jiang Pingji was difficult to deal with, but they didn't expect her to be so harsh with her words. She didn't leave them any face at all. What she'd said just now was just short of pointing at their noses and scolding them as heartless and unscrupulous villains. For a moment, their faces were a little hot, as if they'd been slapped a few times in the face in front of the world. However, the older, the wiser. They were all people who were used to great storms and waves. Their mental fortitude was rather strong, and they wouldn't change their expressions because of this. Not only would they not change their expressions, but they would also find a suitable excuse to save some face for themselves in the shortest time possible. Why had they offered Enchui's concubine and posthumous son? It was all for their new lord, Jiang Pingji. Since Jiang Pingji was the person destined by the heavens, even if Enchui was their former lord, they had to look up to a wise lord. Whoever the heavens had chosen to be the true dragon emperor, they should follow the will of the heavens to assist that person. How could they do something that went against the will of the heavens because of a wrong relationship between the ruler and the subject? Moreover, since Jiang Pingji was the true dragon emperor, she had a heart that could accept all rivers running into the sea. How could she be so petty that she couldn't even accept the posthumous son of a defeated opponent? They offered Enchui's concubine and posthumous son, naturally, not to take credit and curry favor. Regardless of whether she could accept them or not, they'd said what needed to be said and done what needed to be done. They'd fulfilled their duties as subjects. The rest was Jiang Pingji's business. They were indeed old fellows who had lived a long life. They had a sense of propriety. If it had been someone else who had the bad habit of being overzealous, these words would have had a huge effect. Which person in a high position wouldn't like to listen to flattery? However, the person they were facing now was none other than Jiang Pingji. Jiang Pingji ignored the flattery of these old fellows and turned to ask about the age of the fetus in Xichang's princess's womb. The princess's voice was very embarrassed. She wished she could dig a hole and bury herself in it. She didn't know how she'd gotten to this point. The first time she saw Jiang Pingji, she was still the princess of a country and received courteous treatment. Now, however, she was the concubine of a defeated opponent. Naturally, she was a captive and an existence at the mercy of others. Jiang Pingji silently calculated the time in her heart. The other party was about to give birth soon. You are Enchui's concubine, and you're pregnant with his posthumous son. I've never liked to make things difficult for the old, weak, women, and children. Enchui's bloodline is only left with this one in your womb. Then you can rest assured and give birth to this child. I'll send people to take care of you and your son. She didn't have any emotional fluctuations, as if the princess was an unimportant passerby. In reality, she was indeed a passerby, not worthy of her attention. The princess had thought she was dead for sure. She'd never expected this outcome. If she could live, could the child in her womb also live? For a moment, the princess's heart was filled with mixed feelings. Thousands of thoughts tangled in her heart. These days, she'd racked her brains for survival. She'd been anxious and uneasy for so long. To her, matters of life and death were not worth mentioning in Jiang Pingji's eyes. With a few simple words, she decided whether she lived or died. She decided the future of the child in her womb. The jealousy in the princess's heart churned endlessly. The sour taste almost surged up her throat. Was this what it felt like to hold great power? A single word determined life. A single word threatened death. It wasn't until now that the princess understood what it meant to say, thunder, rain, and dew are all the king's grace. Jiang Pingji didn't care about the princess's matter. She was more concerned about Hua Yuan's whereabouts. That lunatic dared to imagine that he was Lu Shi. Chapter 1696. Hua Yuan had disappeared, and no one knew where he was. How did he disappear? Jiang Pingji couldn't believe it. Hua Yuan, the troublemaker, had disappeared just like that. The surrendered official replied, he had a relapse. He was unconscious and lost. What relapse? It seemed like he had lost his mind. Jiang Pingji was from the future world. She naturally knew that with the medical methods of this era, the result of losing his mind was death. Hua Yuan's ending was not surprising. A person who was conscious and crazy at times, and whose conscious time was getting shorter and shorter, would die in some corner. However, Hua Yuan's split personality, Lu Shi, was a hidden danger. It was best to confirm his death personally to be at ease. Jiang Pingji said, send someone to look for him. If he's alive, I want to see him. If he's dead, I want to see his corpse. The surrendered officials felt uneasy. Hua Yuan, who had already gone mad, made Jiang Pingji pay so much attention to him, but they, who had performed meritorious deeds, were given the cold shoulder. It was really unfair. Of course, they didn't dare to say this out loud. There was no dissatisfaction on their faces. Instead, they became more devout and obedient. Little did they know that Jiang Pingji wouldn't fall for it. She turned her head and said to Wei Ci and the others, "These people aren't useful. Let's observe them for a while. If they are obedient, let them do some trivial things. If they don't, let them go home and plant sweet potatoes." Although she hated them, these people could still be used. For example, they could do some trivial things. After all, Jiangpingji was short of people. Nanjing's land area wasn't the largest among the 5 countries, but it wasn't the smallest either. If the land of the 4 factions of Nanman was included, it would be very significant. Behind the huge area was an urgent need for talents. Jiangpingji could foresee how busy the following days would be. The original people in each of Nanjing's prefectures had to be screened. Those who could be used would be retained. Those who could not be used would be cleared out and replaced with new people. Because each prefecture had suffered from more than 10 years of war, the people's livelihood had withered, and the farmlands were abandoned. Many government agencies existed in name only. There were even local ruffians and local tyrants who relied on their power to become local tyrants. These were the stumbling blocks on the road to reconstruction. The project was huge. Jiangpingji decided to deal with Nanjing first before going to Zhongzhou. She let Qiguan Rang and Sun Wen play first. "Let's send out a recruitment notice and see how many people come to apply." This was like a recruitment notice. Those who were interested could apply, and those who weren't would just forget about it. However, the recruitment order in ancient times was a serious and sacred event, but Jiangpingji made it seem like she was recruiting laborers. Job application? Feng Zhen's hand paused. Their lord often spoke terms that others didn't understand, and most of them were her own creations. It wasn't appropriate for them to ask too many questions, so they could only interpret the meaning of the words and understand them on their own. Fortunately, he had a smart brain. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to keep up with the pace. "How does my lord intend to apply for the position?" Jiangpingji had issued recruitment announcements in the past, but the scale was not as large as this one. There were too many secondary people. "I'll write a rule for you. According to the rule, issue the recruitment notice and let the applicants prepare their own materials. This will save you the trouble." As Jiangpingji spoke, she picked up her pen and drew on a piece of paper. If the applicant is qualified, he can be recruited. It's very convenient. There was a huge problem with the employment system in this era. The transmission of information about talents depended on the recommendation of connections. In other words, those with connections, good family backgrounds, good looks would have a higher chance of becoming an official. Those from poor families didn't have this opportunity. They could only recommend themselves to be followers of others and attach themselves to the strong. If they were lucky enough to be chosen, they might have the opportunity to make a name for themselves. Jiangpingji was in urgent need of manpower. She didn't have the time to dilly-dally. She handed the plan to Feng Zhen, who was in charge of the general rules. The specific contents of the recruitment notice were to be drawn up by Feng Zhen and a few others. Feng Zhen took a few glances, his eyebrows twitching non-stop. "My lord, this isn't appropriate." She was treating talents as if they were cabbages and picky. She even wanted the cabbages to come personally. Jiangpingji said, "What's inappropriate? I'm pressed for time and short of manpower. The opportunity is right in front of them. It's up to them whether they want to come or not. If they miss this opportunity, who would care about them? It's just a test of their true abilities. If they're afraid of even this, don't come asking for humiliation." Feng Zhen was speechless. Sigh, after so many years, his lord's temper was getting worse and worse. Of course, she also had the capital to throw a tantrum. Times were different now. She had 2 countries under her control. Those young people who were eager to become officials had to follow her rules. They had no right to act like they were big shots. Therefore, the recruitment notice this time was written differently. It was almost like the prototype of a company's recruitment in the future. As soon as the recruitment notice was announced, the circle of Nanqing's aristocratic families was shaken again. Was she treating them like cabbages to pick and choose? However, Jiang Pingji had millions of soldiers in her hands. Nanqing's aristocratic families had also suffered great losses in more than 10 years of war. They couldn't contend against her. If they couldn't contend, then so be it. Why couldn't they resist with cold force? Some aristocratic families with high temperament restrained their family members from applying for the job. On the contrary, those with shallow backgrounds wanted to use this opportunity to turn things around. There was no harm in taking the initiative to come to the door and let others pick and choose. Only by enduring the humiliation for a while could they have a bright future in the future. As this was the first time such a recruitment method was used, Wei Xi and the others were worried that something would go wrong along the way. Those who were too young and inexperienced would not be able to control the situation. Therefore, they simply took turns to be the interviewers. As Jiang Pingji advanced step by step, they also became big shots in the eyes of outsiders. This decision was beyond everyone's expectations. What did this mean? It meant that the Duke of Lanting attached great importance to this recruitment. He was actually willing to send out so many big shots. With them as the interviewers, the scholars who came to apply for the job felt much better. The recruitment notice was very clear. Every scholar who came to apply for the job had made sufficient preparations. They couldn't wait to write down all their strengths. If it wasn't for the inappropriate occasion, there would probably be resumes such as speaking at the age of 1, being literate at the age of 2, reading the Analects of Confucius at the age of 3, and reciting poems at the age of 4. Of course, Wei Xi and the others were not there to listen to this nonsense. The examinations they prepared were very targeted. They strived to test the depth of the other party in the shortest time possible. In order to reduce mistakes and omissions, once they were hired, they would specially send people to examine the authenticity of the applicants' resumes. If there was any falsification, it would be a serious crime of deception. A light punishment would be jail time. A heavy punishment would implicate the reputation of the whole family and clan. The ugly words were said first. It extinguished the trend of falsifying resumes. Why do you come every time? The last applicant had just left. Fengzhen took the time to drink a cup of strong tea to refresh himself. Wei Xi asked in return, "Isn't this good?" "It's good. It's not that I'm afraid your body can't take it. If you're too tired." As he said this, Fengzhen glanced at Wei Xi's lower abdomen. His gaze was lewd. Wei Xi was speechless. He was still flirtatious at this time. He should complain to Wan Xiu when he got back. Wei Xi pursed his lips and did not speak. Fengzhen was snubbed. He yawned and let the next applicant come in. Not long after, the scholar who was called came in with the attendants. Fengzhen almost choked on his saliva when he saw it. She didn't have the face and temperament of his lord. Why didn't she dress as a man? Did she really think that they were all blind? Chapter 1697. Compared to Fengzhen's loss of composure, Wei Xi's reaction was much calmer. He didn't seem to see through the interviewer's clumsy disguise and glanced at the person's resume. The two words Su Chun were impressively in the list. It really was her. "What's your name?" Wei Xi and a few others took turns interviewing, but Wei Xi came to every class, not because he loved this job, but because he had the advantage of foresight compared to ordinary people. If he didn't make good use of this advantage to create value, wouldn't it be a pity? For example, for this interview, he had some impression of many of the scholars being interviewed. This was much more accurate than the resumes they submitted. Some of them were truly talented and virtuous, and could be employed without worry. But there were also slackers mixed in, and the interviewer had to find a way to check and identify them. If someone with bad intentions was successfully promoted, the people in Nanxing would be the unlucky ones. When the recruitment notice was first sent out, Wei Ci was wondering if Su Chen would appear. He didn't expect her to really come. My surname is Su, and my name is Chen. I'm from Ningzhou. Greetings to both of you. No need for formalities. Wei Ci went straight to the point without any delay. If you're ready, you can begin. The girl said respectfully, I'm ready. Sir, please set the question. Feng Zhen was frantically hinting at Wei Ci with his peripheral vision, but the latter chose to be intermittently blind and ignored his little tricks. Wei Ci was in charge of this interview. When the interview assessment was over, he put the book of interview questions on the table. That's enough. Go back and wait for news. There will be results in 3 days. The girl bowed and retreated to wait for the other interviewer. Taking advantage of this gap, Feng Zhen said, the content this person submitted is most likely fake. Why can't you tell? Wei Ci said, it can't be fake. She's obviously a woman. If she really wanted to become an official, no one would stop her if she wore female clothes. Why did she disguise herself as a man and deceive us? Feng Zhen didn't understand. The recruitment notice didn't say that talents had to be male. Why did she have to be so careful and come up with an alias? If she didn't get recruited, that would be fine. But if she did, her resume would be easily found out to be fake. Wei Ci said, this woman's name is Miyu. Su Chen is her first name. So what if he was dressed as a man? She did not say that she was a man. There was no written rule in this world that said that women had to dress as women and men had to dress as men. It doesn't matter if the name is fake, as long as the person is real. Back then, his lord had also used this kind of sophistry to absolve herself from deceiving the world by dressing up as a man. One could have double standards, but double standards could not be a slap in the face to his lord. When Feng Zhen heard this, he could not help but look at Wei Ci with a complicated expression. You know this woman. Otherwise, how would you know so much? With the lord, he still had the guts to pay attention to other women. Was he tired of living? Without raising his head, Wei Ci said, observing the stars at night and calculating with my fingers, I'll know. Feng Zhen was speechless. Wei Ci had used this lousy excuse for many years. Even if he was not sick of it, others would be sick of it. Well, our demigod Wei, what did you find by observing the stars at night and calculating with your fingers? Wei Ci said, Miyu is a woman with a story. It just so happens that my lord needs her. She came at the right time. There were 3 thresholds for this call to recruit talents. There were 766 people who participated in the first written examination, and this was only the first batch. However, there was not a single woman among these people. There was only one woman, Miyu, who was dressed as a man. If Mi Qian had not appeared, Wei Ci had planned to put on a self-directed marketing campaign of buying a horse's bones with 1,000 gold coins. What story could she have? You'll find out in the future. Wei Ci's tone softened as he spoke on behalf of Miyu. Not to mention anything else, just the fact that she was able to walk up to us is already not easy. You're right. Feng Zhen recalled the rules of the call to recruit talents and nodded in agreement. It must have been hard on these scholars. The interview was the last stage. The first 2 thresholds were submitting one's resume and written examination. There was nothing much to say in the resume segment. In short, it was to play to their strengths and avoid their weaknesses, boasting in all sorts of ways to let others see their abilities. The second threshold was the written examination. It was not long, and there were only 10 questions. Due to the limited space, there were no complicated and vast collections of classics and history. Moreover, 10 questions would not be able to test the true background of the candidates. Under their Lord's suggestion, they changed the exam to 9 practical questions and a semi-proposition, which was a discussion of an essay. The questions were not difficult to understand. Any child who had studied for 2 or 3 years would be able to understand what the questions were about. However, it was not easy to score high. Many scholars who came to participate in the examination came in full of confidence and left with a confused look on their faces. At the same time, they cursed in their hearts. What were they testing on? The style of the examination questions was strange. It was not easy for scholars to cheat. For example, there was a murder case in a county. The victim was a woman, and the perpetrator was her husband. The two of them had a pair of children. The children were underage. Usually, it was the woman who did the housework, took care of the children, and served the in-laws. However, the mother-in-law was dissatisfied with the harsh nature of her daughter-in-law, who argued and hit people. Therefore, she urged her son to kill his wife and remarry. If the examinee was the county magistrate, how would the case be judged? What was the reason? Apart from this, there were also hypothetical questions such as, how to deal with the collapse of the embankment in a certain place, how to pacify the civil unrest in a certain place, as well as, the situation after the defeat of the Nie family in Zhongzhou, when will the Duke of Lanting send troops to Zhongzhou, and other conjectures about the current situation. There was no fixed answer to such questions. They had to speculate and prove from many aspects and details. It seemed that no matter how they answered, they would be lacking. If it was a simple answer such as, sentence a certain person to death, use a large number of troops to suppress the rebels, recruit corvée to build the embankment, there was no need to look further. Such examinees would definitely be eliminated without any suspense. Only those who passed the written examination, which was physically and mentally tormented, could participate in the final interview. If the scholars even passed the interview, they would be conscripted. This was the first time such a selection system had been used in Nanxing. Many scholars shouted about how bad Jiang Pingji was while they participated in the written examination, which was physically and mentally tormented. In comparison, the difficulty of the interview was not that great. They could also see the big shots. Whether it was the written examination or the interview, Mi Qian's performance was quite outstanding. She might even be able to get into the top 3. As a red dot in a sea of greenery, her information was presented to Jiang Pingji for her to read and decide. Jiang Pingji looked through it carefully, especially Mi Qian's examination paper. She looked through it repeatedly. Zisher, what do you think? She put aside Mi Qian's examination paper, resume, and the comments of the 2 interviewers during the interview. Feng Zhen said, after discussing with Zixiao, we have decided to recommend her. Chapter 1698. The first question on Me Too's test was written by Feng Zhen. The main idea was how to fix the collapse of a certain river bank. Some of the candidates' answers were very superficial. When asked how to fix the river bank, they answered honestly. Some of their answers were very imaginative. Me Too's answers were very detailed and practical. Not only did she describe in detail how to fix the river bank, but she also mentioned various hypotheses, such as whether the collapse of the river bank was caused by human factors, if it was, how to deal with it, how to deal with the flood after the river bank collapsed, how to restore the lives of the people in the county after the flood passed through. She even simulated the cost of disaster relief for each step. She completely put herself in the role of the virtual character in the question. She considered all aspects from the character's point of view. One question was written on 2 pieces of paper, but the dense words made it very enjoyable to read. Feng Zhen and the rest didn't come up with these questions to select candidates who could answer them. They wanted to select people who could govern the various counties. It was obvious that Me Too's answer was correct. Her answer was beautiful. Her style was fundamentally different from other flirtatious people. Other than this question, she answered the other 8 questions well. The best was still the last question. The others only had 5 or 6 answers, and some had 11 or 12. She was the only one who had 23 answers. Having a lot of answers didn't mean that she was weak. On the contrary, her questions were all practical. She was capable and was recommended by both Wei Ci and Feng Zhen. Naturally, Jiang Pingji would add her to the list. If she made any achievements, she could be trained as a key talent in the future. But, since her real name was Me Too, why did she use the fake name of Su Chun? Was it because a woman's identity wasn't as convenient as a man's? Jiang Pingji's interest was piqued. She planned to send someone to investigate and see if there was any inside information. Feng Zhen accepted the order and retreated. He would rest for the night and continue his shift tomorrow afternoon. Such a woman should be quite famous, Jiang Pingji said. But how did Zixiao know her real name? Although he asked with a smile, Wei Ci's desire to live sounded the alarm. My lord, you are asking the obvious. It's because Me Too was your colleague in your previous life. You can only recognize her in this life. Jiang Pingji smiled. Colleague in my previous life. Tell me about it. I feel like she will give me a different surprise. If something had not happened to such an outstanding woman, there was no reason why she did not have a presence in Wei Ci's previous life. Wei Ci said, here. In his previous life, during the early years of the Jiang dynasty, there weren't many female officials, but every single one of them was very good at fighting, and this ability didn't just refer to their martial prowess. For example, Mi Miao was completely powerless, but there weren't many in the royal court who dared to fight her head-on. Moreover, their home ground was not in the imperial court. Under the orders of the emperor, he was responsible for inspecting the salt affairs of the 3 rivers and 6 rivers. He was also responsible for inspecting the corruption and bribery of various officials. In his hand was an imperial sword, and he had the right to act first and report later. Regardless of whether it was salt work or investigating corrupt officials, they were both very offensive jobs. It was one thing to offend people, but it was also easy for her to be plotted against and murdered. The number of people who wanted her life could line up across the entire 3 rivers and 6 rivers. However, Mi Qian's personality was quite unyielding, and she was unmoved by force or persuasion. The number of officials that she had kicked out could easily form 100 mahjong tables in hell. Such a valiant woman naturally had a glorious battle record. Bai Yuexia became the Minister of Works, and before her retirement, she sent her portrait to the Golden Scale Pavilion's Heavenly Craftsman list. Mi Qian, on the other hand, was conferred the title of Marquis and sent her portrait to the Civil Official list. Among the 3 lists of Civil Official, Military General, and Heavenly Craftsman, the Civil Official list was the most difficult and competitive. For her to be able to get a place and not be at the bottom, it showed how good she was at fighting. If Mi Qian hadn't appeared on her own, Wei Ci would have gone to look for her. In the live broadcast room, Salted Fish had already accepted the setting of Wei Ci's rebirth as the female lead, and was listening to the gossip with great interest. Liu Siji Lianming, this Miss Mi Qian is too unyielding. Can't think of a name, I'm crazy cheering for this miss, I can't wait to see her. Dongfeng Express, I'm suddenly very envious. If there were such dynasties in our history, the living conditions of women probably wouldn't be so difficult. Miss Mi Qian could make countless people kneel and call her daddy in the modern world, let alone in ancient times. Burning snow, don't be envious of others. Our ancient history also had many strong and handsome women, but very few people promoted them. Ha ha ha, although it's very good, I still think our streamer is the best. Apart from the bullet screen, many salted fish also asked Jiang Pingji to pay attention to Wei Ci. After all, the sign of a man's love shifting was that he developed a strong interest and appreciation for another woman. Actually, the salted fish's worries were unnecessary, and Jiang Pingji didn't take it to heart. Then do you know why she appeared in men's clothing? Wei Ci said, My lord, you may not know, but the female officials in the imperial court in your previous life almost all had a common characteristic. Jiang Pingji frowned and asked tentatively, could it be marriage? Wei Ci nodded. This was indeed a pity. Family had a special meaning for women. Bearing the pressure from the secular world, breaking through the shackles of the family, and walking step by step to a height that countless people couldn't reach, not only required great strength, but also a strong heart. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to hold on long ago. Bai Yuexia married Shi Zhong and divorced in the end. Mi Qian was similar, but she was more decisive. Jiang Pingji said, continue. Wei Ci said, Mi Qian was from the Ningzhou of Nanxing. She was born into wealth since she was young, and her parents were famous scholars and beauties in Ningzhou. However, they met with an accident when Mi Qian was 7 or 8 years old. They contracted the epidemic and died. Mi Qian was entrusted to other relatives to take care of. But, she was an orphan after all. Even if she was born into a good family, she couldn't help but be treated coldly. After Mi Qian reached marriageable age, she married her first husband, who was of a similar age, according to the marriage agreement left by her father. The two also lived in harmony for a period of time, but this husband was weak and had a chronic illness from his mother's womb. He died of illness in less than 2 years because of a cold. Mi Qian was a widow for 2 years, and under the decision of her relatives, she remarried. This person was also Mi Qian's last husband, but their tempers didn't match, and they often quarreled. The first marriage was very happy, but the second marriage was a battlefield where she and her husband tortured each other. Her husband was born into an aristocratic family, but he was an ignorant and incompetent playboy. He ate, drank, whored, and gambled. On the contrary, Mi Qian was a talented woman. Her first husband was also a scholar, and he was extremely respectful to her. The two of them had common topics, and they could talk about anything. They were close friends. What about her second husband? He was useless, and he still didn't know how to improve. How could Mi Qian take a liking to him? Chapter 1699. Quarrel often. In this era, when a couple quarreled, it was usually the woman who was at a disadvantage. It was fine if she met a well-mannered husband, at most they would scold him verbally, but if she met a scum, she would hit him with her fists when she was angry. Under normal circumstances, an adult man's strength was not comparable to a normal woman's. If they fought, they would really be at a disadvantage. According to Wei Ci's description, Mi Chu's second husband was a playboy with no bottom line. Wei Ci had a telepathic connection with her, so he said, "Don't worry, my lord." Mi Chu did not suffer much. Mi Chu remarried, and her second husband was secretly happy that he had married a talented woman, which was interesting for a few days. But he was a complete scum, narrow-minded and jealous. How could the two have anything in common? Moreover, of the 1,000 books that Mi Chu brought with her, 70% were left by her parents, and the remaining 30% were left by her ex-husband. Every time he saw these books, the scum husband would feel upset, but Mi Chu liked to stay in the study, addicted to books, unable to extricate herself. In the eyes of the scum husband, this behavior was Mi Chu's expression of missing her ex-husband, which made him jealous. Not only did she miss her ex-husband, but she also kept his belongings. What an unfaithful woman. In less than half a month, the scum husband showed his true colors. His friends even added fuel to the fire, mocking him for marrying a widow, and some said that Michu's ex-husband was white moonlight, and he was worse than shit on the ground. The scum husband became angry. One time, he went crazy and wanted to burn Michu's book collection, and the two of them had a conflict. During the conflict, Michu was punched twice by the other party. Seeing that her husband was still angry, he kept shouting that he was going to beat her to death, which made Miyu furious. She called for her servants to tie this husband up and gave him a good beating to sober him up. She whipped him so hard that he started crying, and no one could stop him. After this conflict, the couple, who had not even been married for a month, completely broke up. Jiang Pingji listened with great interest. Such a tough girl was really likable. Michu whipped her husband, and the in-laws didn't object. Wei Ci said, this marriage was originally requested by Miyu's in-laws. They requested for Miyu's hand in marriage on behalf of their son. Naturally, they took a fancy to Miyu's ability. They only had one son, and their only son was a good-for-nothing. If the two elders passed away, all the wealth they had accumulated over several generations would be gone. My son was in the wrong first, and they wanted something from Miku, so I'll just turn a blind eye to this matter. The slacker husband wasn't satisfied with Miyu, but the in-laws were extremely satisfied. On the second day after Miyu married into the family, the two elders handed her the authority to manage the household. She didn't show her timidity either. As soon as she arrived, she cleaned up her husband's family in an orderly manner. However, Mikan's abilities were not what the two elders were most satisfied with. What they were most satisfied with were the 1,000 books that she had received as a dowry. After all, the books they had collected over the past few generations didn't even amount to 20% of Mitu's dowry. If Mi Qian was pregnant, the child she gave birth to would also be able to teach well, and the two elders wouldn't have to worry about this family's decline. Besides, their son was too shameful. He actually dared to make a move against the mistress of the household. He didn't have the slightest bit of self-restraint and was more like a hoodlum. As long as he didn't beat him to death, there was no harm in whipping him to teach him a lesson. The in-laws chose to watch from the sidelines, and Mi Qian controlled all the power in the household. The slacker husband couldn't do anything to her. The husband is unreliable, but the in-laws are still clear-headed. Jiang Pingji didn't agree. How is it clear-headed? It's clearly selfishness. If it was someone else, I'm afraid that person would be tortured to death. My lord's words make sense. The in-laws didn't help their son because they were reasonable, but because they hoped that Mi Qian would carry the household for them. If they were really good people, they wouldn't have spent so much effort and money to get in touch with Mi Qian's relatives, and use them to force Mi Qian to remarry. Didn't they know what kind of person their son was, and whether he was someone they could entrust the rest of their life to? If it wasn't for Mi Qian's own abilities, and her ex-husband's plans for his young wife before he died, who knew how her life would be like now? For an ordinary woman, these days are a little troublesome, but it's not like they can't live on. Why is Mi Qian here? Wei Ci smiled. Didn't my lord say that she's an ordinary woman? Mi Qian wasn't an ordinary woman, and she couldn't tolerate her idiotic husband forever. I don't know Mi Qian's motive for becoming an official in this life, but I know a little in my previous life. Her Majesty entered Nanxing, and it was time for her to use people. Mi Qian's in-laws felt that this was a good opportunity, so they coaxed and pestered her to teach their son more, and they used some connections to get their son a small official position. Mi Qian did as she was told, but her husband was a good-for-nothing, and the more she forced him to learn, the more he refused. In the end, he even insulted Mi Qian, saying, "It's a shame for a husband to be a woman's teacher." In a fit of anger, Mi Qian said, "I'm so stupid, if I become an official, it'll be as easy as taking something out of my pocket." When Mi Qian said that, the slacker husband was unwilling. What, is Jiang Pingji your father or your mother? You can become an official just because you say so. Do you think the government office is your family's vegetable market? If you, a woman from the inner house, can become an official, I'll kneel and eat this bamboo scroll. Intelligence limited the slacker husband's imagination. Mi Qian sneered and packed her luggage to participate in the recruitment. She used her ability to show her husband what it meant to take something out of his pocket. Before she left, she even asked the kitchen to study the dishes on the bamboo scroll. She wanted to see the idiot swallow the bamboo scroll with her own eyes. It was because of this reason in my previous life, and it's probably the same in this life. Jiang Pingji was amused. This reason is quite unique. Did she dump her husband in the end? Wei Ci said, that person was old and frail, so he was forced to divorce by Mi Qian. In societal terms, Mi Qian had enough of this idiot. When she was young, at least she had a face to look at. If she wanted to die, then so be it. She endured it. She was so brainless now that she was old, and she was an eyesore. If she got rid of her earlier, she would suffer less and live a few more years. Jiang Pingji looked at the screen full of 666 and laughed involuntarily. It would be a blessing to be as innocent as a salted fish. She felt that the reason why Mi Qian divorced her second husband was not just because of family conflicts. If it was because of family conflicts, her slacker husband would have been kicked countless times. In Jiang Pingji's opinion, their divorce was also influenced by the outside world. As the saying goes, blocking someone's money is like killing one's parents. Just look at Han Yu's ex-wife's family, Mrs. Tao, to know how profitable the illicit salt trade was. Not to mention corruption and bribery, which was a magic weapon for many officials to get rich. Cutting off these two paths was as good as cutting off their path to survival. Of course, they would hate Mi Qian. They couldn't wait to use a magnifying glass to find the dirt on her and then pull her down. If they couldn't find the dirt on Mi Qian, then they would find the dirt on her husband. Mi Qian wanted to stabilize her official position and protect her family, so it was a good choice to cut off the relationship with the divorce. Chapter 1700. Madam, you're back. As soon as Miyu returned, a young woman wearing a water green dress walked towards her. The woman had her hair combed into a bun, her eyes were filled with lust and her lips were curved into a smile, a bright and gentle light shone in her eyes. The woman raised her hand to help her remove the heavy things on her shoulders, looking very virtuous. This servant has already ordered someone to prepare hot water, why don't Madam go and wash up first? Master is waiting in the room, his temper still hasn't calmed down. Miyu curled her lips in her mind. I understand. The woman brought a neatly folded set of women's clothing to Miyu, helped her wash up, and helped her dress and comb her hair. Not long later, the woman who was originally dressed as a man became a beautiful married woman, but her lips were habitually pressed down, her eyes were silent, looking a little serious. How did Madam's test go? The woman knelt down and helped Miyu tie her belt into a bow, carefully adjusting its position and smoothing out the creases. Not bad, I have some confidence. Right, why is he here too? The woman teased, he's probably worried that Madam will really let him eat the bamboo scroll. Miyu replied, I'm not joking with him. After tidying up the room, Mika went to the main hall. Before she even entered the room, she saw a pale-faced gentleman sitting in the room. If one only looked at his appearance, the man could be considered above average. Unfortunately, he was only an embroidered pillow that looked good but was actually useless. As soon as Miyu arrived, the man started to complain. What time is it already, why aren't you eating yet? Miyu ignored him and sat on her mat. The water-green dress woman brought her a table and set up the utensils. The man became even angrier and shouted at the woman in the green dress, "You're such an idiot with poor eyesight. I'm the head of this house, as a concubine, why are you so attentive to her? Hurry up and serve her, don't make me angry. Both of them were blind, all of his concubines were supporting this woman Miyu, they must be crazy. Before he married Miyu, there were 7 or 8 women serving him in the inner courtyard. The women who once fought for his affections, after Miyu married him, all of them seemed to have been drugged, trying their best to please Miyu. What happened to the inner courtyard fighting? He was their man, so what was the point of currying favor with Miyu? How infuriating. This time, it was even more outrageous. A woman didn't stay in the inner residence and insisted on coming out to compete with a group of men. She did not follow the ways of a woman, so the concubines in the inner courtyard were also crazy. They fought with each other to go out with her and serve her along the way. If these concubines went to serve Michu, who would serve him? The concubine's hand froze. Miku said expressionlessly, "Ignore him." It was just the barking of a mad dog. There was no need to pay it any mind. The concubine smiled and said, "Yes." The man, whose concubines were these? He resisted the urge to flip the table and suppressed his boiling anger. "What are you looking at? Hurry up and bring it over. Do you want to starve me to death?" The man was angered by Mi Tong, so he turned around and vented his anger on someone else. Even when the food was served, his anger still hadn't subsided. "Time to eat." Saying so, the man saw that Mi Tong had already started eating from the corner of his eyes. He was so angry that he almost had a heart attack. He, as the head of the house, hadn't even said that he could eat yet she dared to eat first. Seeing the man's stupid look, Mi Tong's lips curled into a cold smile. After so many years, his brain was still so stupid. Why did all the concubines in the inner courtyard fawn over her? Did this person not know it all? Naturally, it was because there were more benefits to serving Mi Tong than serving men, and the work was also easier. If it wasn't for benefits, then what was it for? No woman would want to become a concubine. Becoming a concubine to fight for favor was just to obtain a stable life and good conditions from a man. Before Mi Tong married over, these concubines weren't treated very well. The residence was filled with chaos. Many of the concubines would fight over a few dishes, beautiful satin, or even a few caddies of charcoal for the winter. That ignorant look really made people want to laugh. After she married over, she used her methods to make these women see the reality. Men were useless, the one who could truly bring them a better life was not a man, but her, the matriarch. The concubines fought over a man's affections and worked themselves to death, but in the end, the benefits they obtained were not even as good as fawning over Mi Tong, the matriarch. There were also those who were short-sighted and didn't believe it, and ended up being taught a lesson by Mi Tong. As for the children fighting for favor, it was even more ridiculous. If Mi Tong didn't manage it, even if the concubines fought over it with their sons, they would just be an empty shell. What was there to fight over? In fact, they hoped that Mi Tong would get pregnant and have children, or have a successful career, so that they could accumulate more wealth so that their children could have a bigger share. After all, the so-called head of the house couldn't be relied on at all. Such a simple logic, yet the man didn't understand. No wonder he was getting less and less liked by the concubines, he really was stupid. With a belly full of anger, nothing he ate tasted good, so he hurriedly ate a few mouthfuls before putting down his chopsticks. When he raised his head, he saw a concubine kneeling beside the table, using her slender hands to peel and cut crab legs for Mi Tong, causing his anger to rise. He said in a strange tone, "Did you really go to the Duke of Lanting's recruitment notice?" Mi Tong replied, "I did." The man sneered, "You weren't chased out by someone?" Mi Tong looked up at him. The look in her eyes told her to understand. Women should just stay in the inner residence to take care of their husbands and children, don't dream about unrealistic dreams all day long. The man said, Quite a few people already know about your matter. How do you want my friends to look at me? Well, you haven't lost too much face yet. Quickly return with me, so that you can know your place from now on. Mi Tong sneered. If the men in the house can support the family and are more outstanding than this concubine, why would this concubine need to stand up for them? The man's face instantly turned purple from anger. When did I ever lack food and clothing for you? Do I need you to show your face and make a fool of yourself? Mi Tong said, that's funny. Lungjuan's annual expenses alone cost 9,000 strings of coins. The household's womenfolk, maids, servants, and guards are fixed at 5,000 strings of coins. Father-in-law and mother-in-law's expenses are 3,500 strings of coins, and the social interaction during festivals also costs 4,300 strings of coins. However, the income of the estate's farmlands and shops is less than 10,000 strings of coins, leaving such a huge gap. Could it be that Lang Jun has filled in the gaps? Before Mi Tong married, the estate's account books had been read for years, with losses reaching more than 300,000 strings of coins. Now that the losses had turned into profits, and the estate's food and clothing were getting better and better, wasn't it all because of her? You're living off a woman, yet you still don't know how to correct your attitude. You sure are shameless. The man couldn't win against her in an argument. He had no reason to refute, and if he didn't refute, he would feel suffocated. In short, are you going back or not? Mi Tong said calmly, the Duke of Lanting's declaration of war will arrive in a few days. If you leave now, you won't be afraid of being questioned. Declare war. You? The man almost laughed. If the Duke of Lanting declares war on you, I'll kneel and eat this table raw. Mi Tong. Chapter 1701. What's with that look? Receiving Mi Chu's understand look, the man was annoyed. Was she doubting him or looking down on him? If it wasn't for me spoiling you, do you really think you're someone important? This woman actually dared to roll her eyes at him. She sure had guts. If he didn't do something about it, wouldn't she be stepping on his head in the future? Mi Chu sneered coldly and slowly put down her chopsticks. She took the handkerchief from the concubine and elegantly wiped the corner of her mouth. Since you're so confident, just wait for the bamboo scrolls to be cooked on the table. Our family isn't poor. We can still afford a bamboo scroll and a table. If the kitchen doesn't make it to your liking, this concubine will have the kitchen try a few more dishes until you're satisfied. The man almost choked on her words. The finger he pointed at Mi Chu trembled in anger. Mi Chu stood up from the mat and returned to her room without looking back. The concubine hesitated for a second before decisively following the main wife's footsteps. Dr. Mi Chu was the one who provided for her. If she didn't hug this leg, should she hug that unreliable man instead? The man was so angry that he flipped the table and cursed, but the target of his curses had already left. No matter how harsh and nasty his curses were, there were only a few servants in the audience. Not only did he not affect Mi Chu, he even lost his face and hurt his liver. Bitch! I'm so angry. The man slammed the table and gritted his teeth. I'll divorce this bitch sooner or later. I'll divorce her sooner or later. The servants at the side could only roll their eyes inwardly. If a man dared to divorce, he would have done so 800 years ago. Why would this couple torment each other for so many years? He couldn't understand it either. The first madam was both beautiful and talented. There was a wide market for her to remarry after a divorce. Why did she have to hang herself on this crooked tree? It wasn't just them who didn't understand. The concubines in the man's backyard didn't understand either. Mi Chu was probably the main wife of every man's dream. She would serve the in-laws and raise their children. The entire residence would be well organized. There was no need to worry about the inner and outer courtyards. She never cared which concubine her husband slept in at night. If her husband wanted to take a concubine, she would support him. Even the money for the concubines was earned by her. Other than being tall, men didn't need to use their brains. What man wouldn't like such a virtuous wife? The only difference was that not only would this virtuous wife not flatter her husband, but she would also not be dished by his gorgeous concubines every day. Instead, she could anger her husband so much that even his concubines would stand on her side. Speaking of which, it was very mysterious. Outsiders couldn't see through it at all. In the study, the concubine used the pair of hands that men love to use to massage Miyu's shoulders. Her strength was just right, and her technique was also very experienced. Miku was leaning against a table, flipping through a book, his brows furrowed and relaxed from time to time. The concubine couldn't help but advise, "Why doesn't Madam talk to Master?" Michu flipped a page and replied without even lifting her eyelids, "What do I have to discuss with him?" Saying too much would only anger oneself. Anger would harm the liver, and liver harm would shorten one's lifespan. For the sake of such a man's slow suicide, she was lucky. The concubine said, "Old Master always makes Madam angry, and Madam is also vexed. Why don't you pacify him so that he won't disturb your studies?" Miyu sneered, "Is he even worthy?" The concubine, thinking back to her own master's conduct, "Fine, he really isn't worthy." There is one thing that this concubine doesn't understand. If Madam is willing to answer, why don't you help this concubine? Miyu said, "What is it?" The concubine said, "Madam is talented and beautiful, and you are also young. If you divorce and remarry, you won't have to worry about not being able to find a man of your caliber, so why waste your time on Master? Madam treats us well, and we are not ungrateful. We naturally hope that Madam can be better. As for Master, he isn't all bad, but he can't compare to those young talents. How could other people have so many concubines in their backyards?" Now that she was the wife of a scumbag, she had to put up with an idiot wandering around in front of her every day. Miyu's lips curled up into a faint smile. She said, "To me, no one in this world can be him, so it doesn't matter who I marry." Back then, if it wasn't for her shameless relatives using extreme methods to force her to marry someone else, she planned to be a widow for the rest of her life. Since her current husband couldn't affect her no matter what he did, what difference was there between a divorce and a divorce? After so many years, she had already accepted reality, and didn't want to suffer anymore. If she divorced, there was no guarantee that her so-called maternal relatives wouldn't force her to marry again for benefits. Of course, the current her wouldn't give those people the chance to harm her. The concubine knew very well who the Miyu was talking about was, Miyu's ex-husband, who was rumored to be a gentleman. Also, there's nothing bad about him taking more concubines. Miyu's words were out of the concubine's expectations. Would there be a wife who liked her husband taking concubines? There are many beautiful things in the world, but they can't compare to beautiful women. Each and every one of them is more beautiful than flowers, beautiful and young. Just by standing there, they are already a painting. Miyu smiled. You guys always have your own skills. For example, you can always massage the shoulders and back just right. Usually, when you sit and read too much, your neck and shoulders hurt. With just a little massage, how can your days not be beautiful? Yunyang has a yellow voice, and I like to listen to her singing in the backyard in the early morning. Her mood will be good for the whole day. Xiao Hong can dance in the sky, and her figure is beautiful. Pig trotters liked beautiful and talented concubines. He spent a lot of money to redeem several of them from brothels. Miyu liked them too. Rather than saying that these concubines were men's, it was better to say that they were raised by Miyu. Of course. Miyu seemed to have thought of something, and her voice was filled with self-mockery. In this world, women are the most difficult. If he takes one more concubine, won't he have one more place to stay? There are pros and cons, and fortune and disaster depend on each other. It all depends on what the people involved think. No one knew that when she was young, she hated the existence of concubines the most, and she scoffed at this twisted logic. However, times had changed, and the world was different. Nanxing had experienced more than 10 years of war, and there were many women who had suffered misfortune. She had seen too many naked corpses in the wilderness, their corpses covered in maggots, and the scenes of being exposed to the wind and sun. For most people, living was not easy, so they had no right to be picky about how they lived. "Madam, will the Duke of Lanting really order an expedition?" Miyu said with certainty, "Definitely, he will. He needs me." The concubine smiled. "If that's the case, the old master, is he really going to eat the table of bamboo slips?" "Humph, a gentleman never goes back on his word. If he says he'll eat it, then I'll watch him kneel and finish it." Before the expedition document was issued, Jiang Pingji received a few pieces of news. Many people said that they had seen people similar to Hua Yuan. Jiang Pingji connected the dots and discovered a secret. Hua Yuan was heading north in the direction of Ningzhou. Ningzhou. Isn't that Hua Yuan's ancestral home? Chapter 1702. Lord, are you guessing that Hua Yuan has gone to Ning province? Jiang Pingji secretly summoned Wei Xiai and told him about Hua Yuan. Jiang Pingji said, "That's what I guessed. If I remember correctly, you said that Hua Yuan died of illness in Ningzhou in his previous life." "Indeed, but in this life. I didn't expect Hua Yuan to end up the same way. If it weren't for this encounter in his childhood, Hua Yuan wouldn't have lost his mind, and he wouldn't have lived his life like this. If he was clear-headed, it wouldn't be difficult for him to live to the end of his life, even if he didn't achieve success and recognition. How does my lord intend to deal with him? Should we send someone to capture him or kill him on the spot?" Wei Xiai felt sorry for Hua Yuan, but he did not sympathize with him. After all, no matter how pitiful Hua Yuan was, his wrongdoings could not be forgiven. Jiang Pingji crossed her arms and supported her chin. She looked up at Wei Xiai. "I'm going to see him in person to settle this once and for all. Zixiao, do you want to come with me?" Even if the personality created by Hua Yuan was fake, she would still feel uncomfortable if she didn't deal with it herself. After fighting the war for 2 to 3 years, she and Zixiao didn't have much time to be alone, so they could take this opportunity to spend some time together. Wei Xiai smiled and said, "You lied to them at the critical moment. If you don't give a reason, I'm afraid they'll complain again." He was especially worried that Feng Zhen and the rest would misunderstand that his lord was abusing his position for personal gain. Jiang Pingji said nonchalantly, "The war in Nanxing has stopped, but there are still civil unrest of varying sizes in various places. It will take some time to completely pacify them. As the Lord, how can I sit back and do nothing? In order to ensure the safety of the people, these vermin must be eradicated without delay." Was she someone who abused her position for personal gain? She was clearly doing this for the sake of the general situation and the people. She wanted to deal with the hidden danger of Hua Yuan and bring peace and stability to the people along the way. No matter how many times he heard or watched it, Wei Xiai could not help but sigh at his lord's ability to lie through her teeth. No one could compare to her. "I'll have to trouble my lord to say these words to Zixia and the rest. I won't overstep my boundaries." Jiang Pingji rested her chin on her hand. "Sigh, Zixiao has also learned to be naughty. Who has led him astray?" In the past, Zixiao was a considerate person. He wouldn't be so mischievous. Wei Xiai blinked his right eye lightly and teased, "What does my lord think?" Jiang Pingji said, "I thought, this is called husband and wife." As time went by, the two of them would become more and more similar in some areas, and more tacit with each other. Wei Ci was so angry that his face turned red. 10 Wei Zixiao's could not compare to 1 Jiang Pingji's level of flirting. The latter's level of flirting had reached the peak. As expected, Feng Zhen and the others rolled their eyes at Jiang Pingji's suggestion. On the surface, he was smiling, but in his heart, he was cursing. What's the point of bringing Zixiao along for work? What's the point? Jiang Pingji raised her eyebrows and smiled. I don't mean much. I can't create the young lord that all of you yearn for by myself, can I? Feng Zhen had a meaningful look in his eyes. He raised his hand to remove Jiang Pingji's hand from his shoulder. While pretending to be serious, he suppressed the corners of his mouth and said righteously, "My lord is right. Quelling the civil unrest and restoring peace to the people is the top priority. Zixiao is steady and meticulous in his work. With him by my lord's side to assist me, I can be at ease." No matter how big the world was, it was not as big as the young master. When the young lord grew up, he wouldn't have to put up with a lord with a terrible temper. Just thinking about it made him happy. He had rolled his eyes just now, but now he was eager for Jiang Pingji to immediately pack up and abduct Wei Ci. Men. Ningzhou wasn't too far from Jiang Pingji's current location, but it wasn't near either. It would take a few days to catch up on horseback. Just as she was about to leave, an unexpected companion interrupted. "What are you doing here?" Jiang Pingji looked at Lu Jing with dissatisfaction. Was this guy trying to mess things up on purpose? Lu Jing said, "I heard that the Duke of Lanting is going to look for Hua Yuan. I have some accumulated grievances with him, so I can take this opportunity to settle them." Jiang Pingji was about to refuse, but she didn't expect Wei Ci to plead for Lu Jing with his eyes. How infuriating. You even have to bring along 2 high-wattage light bulbs. Although she was reluctant, she still brought Lu Jing and his adopted daughter, Kong Xintong. 2 days before the departure, the first batch of names for the conquest was released. The first one was impressively Mi Chu, one could tell from her name that she was a woman. In fact, she was indeed a woman. The faces of the scholars who lined up behind her darkened. Even if they were roaring in their hearts that there was something shady and unfair, they still acted reservedly and congratulated each other on the surface. It was a harmonious scene. The documents for the conquest were specially sent to the temporary lodgings of the scholars. When the congratulatory sound of the gong spread from the alley to the manor, Mi Chu was standing in the courtyard and looking at the clouds in the distance. The concubine who was holding an umbrella for her to shade her from the sun asked in confusion, "Why is it so noisy outside?" "I don't think it's noisy. Instead, it's very pleasant." Mi Chu said meaningfully, "Tell the kitchen to prepare it." "Madam, we just had lunch a quarter of an hour ago." Mi Chu said. The bamboo stir-fried table was prepared for the master. The concubine was stunned for a moment before she reacted. She immediately smiled and congratulated Mi Chu. On that day, the one who felt the most despair was probably Mi Chu's husband. When the good news of the conquest came, it was as if he heard the sound of a death knell. The words, "My life is over," were circling in his mind. "I won't eat it. I won't eat it even if I die." He would rather kneel to death than eat it. After all, they had been husband and wife for several years. He knew that Mi Chu's personality was the most serious. If she said that she wanted to eat the bamboo stir-fried table, she would definitely stuff it down his throat. "Master, before the madam remembers it, let's escape first, shall we?" The attendant suggested to his master with a bitter expression. "After a while, the madam might forget about it. If we stay here any longer, the madam might come." Of the 36 stratagems, escape was the best. The man hurriedly packed his luggage and escaped with his guards. For a long time, he didn't dare to appear in front of Michu. Michu held a plate of bamboo stir-fried fungus in one hand. Looking at the messy room, she sneered without saying a word. He really can't be helped. Let him be. After this incident, he should be able to rest for a while. The concubine watched from the side with cold sweat dripping down her back. Once again, she was impressed by her madam's strength. Anyone with half a brain would know that it was impossible to eat the bamboo stir-fried table. Yet, her master took it seriously. Not only did he take it seriously, he even ran away in fear. The news of Michu being at the top of the list flew out as if it had grown wings. Letting a madam rank above me is a great humiliation. Who was Michu? A madam in the inner chamber. He had studied hard for more than 20 years. How could he be inferior to a madam? There must be a conspiracy behind this. The 21st ranked scholar was unhappy. He had a strong and unyielding character. He refused to admit defeat and refused to be conscripted. The onlookers were dumbfounded as they watched the scholar stomp his feet. Then, they watched in bewilderment as the messenger put the document of conscription into his arms and turned to leave. The scholar was speechless. He left just like that. Wasn't he going to ask him to stay? Isn't the Duke of Lanting a woman too? A spectator whispered. It was not like the scholar didn't know that Jiang Pingji was a woman. If he couldn't stand a woman being ranked above him, why did he run to the assessment? Chapter 1703. Sigh, a grown girl can't be kept at home. If she stays, she'll become enemies. I can understand the bitterness of this saying. Lu Zheng looked at his adopted daughter's back as she hurried up and down. He spoke with a tinge of jealousy and sourness. Jiang Pingji glanced at him and said, "You're the teacher's student. How can you use these words so casually?" She made it sound like she was a scumbag who had stolen Lu Zheng's sweet, cotton-padded jacket. Lu Zheng snorted coldly and said, "Ever since she saw you, she hasn't had any appetite. It's as if she's lovesick. Now she's serving you attentively. Her vigor makes people envious. Even her father has been forgotten. Tell me, where did I use the wrong context? I've doted on her for nothing. It's fine that you harmed a noble lady in Langya County, but you won't even let off a junior. Does your family's Zishao know?" Jiang Pingji pouted and said, "He's right here. He's not deaf or blind. Of course he knows." Wei Xiai, who was innocently implicated in the flames of war, could only smile awkwardly but politely. The journey to Ning province this time was not far, but it was not close either. Considering that the two scholars, Wei Xiai and Lu Zheng, as well as the little girl, Kang Xintong, were accompanying them, Jiang Pingji ordered people to prepare a few more carriages. There were more than 1,000 entourage accompanying them. Everything was light. It was true that she was going to see Hua Yuan, but it was also true that she was going to pacify a small area of civil unrest along the way. It was impractical to bring only a few dozen people. Not to mention whether Feng Jin and the others would agree, Wei Xiai alone would be difficult to pass. Not long after they left the city, Jiang Pingji became a little impatient. She invited Lu Zheng and the others to play chess and chat. Wei Xiai wouldn't reject Jiang Pingji's suggestion, but Lu Zheng was different. He rejected the invitation. It was impossible to play chess. It would never be possible to play chess. If Jiang Pingji pressed him against the chessboard in front of his adopted daughter, would he still have any dignity as a godfather? His mental preparation was ultimately ruined by his adopted daughter's sparkling eyes. Sigh, daughter, you have the opportunity to be close to your idol, but do you know how your old father will be ravaged? How could he have a chance to turn things around when this couple teamed up to bully him? It was impossible for him to turn over. He could only lie flat on the ground and let himself be rubbed against. Only then could he live. Sigh. Lu Zheng looked at the chess game that he could no longer save. He threw the chess piece back with a thud and said, "Until today, I still can't figure out how such a devoted and loyal person like Zixiao could fall in the hands of a person with the style of a prodigal son." Jiang Pingji smiled. "Do you know what human nature is, Xiaoyin?" Lu Jing didn't understand and couldn't help asking with his eyes. "It's human nature to repeat and repeat. You say the same thing every time you see me. Even if you're not sick of it, I'm sick of it. Zixiao is your shitty, not your daughter. You're like an old father whose daughter has been snatched away. As soon as you see your son-in-law, you grab hold of him and repeatedly warn him, grieving over and over again. Sigh, God, please open your eyes and let you only have a son in this life. If you give birth to a daughter, when your daughter marries, wouldn't it be equivalent to digging out your heart? You don't know how sad you would be." Lu Zheng, this curse was too vicious. Lu Zheng was a little regretful at this moment. Why did he follow her? Jiang Pingji seemed to have taken the wrong medicine. She attacked him accurately every few days, so much so that Lu Zheng began to doubt his life. At the thought of having to face such a lord for the rest of his life, Lu Zheng suddenly felt that his life was gloomy and he couldn't see a trace of light. Wei Xi couldn't help but say a few good words for Lu Zheng. Jiang Pingji wrapped her arms around his neck and laughed softly. Her warm breath hit the sensitive part of his neck. Even if he wasn't embarrassed, it was difficult for him to restrain his physiological reaction. His ears were automatically dyed a translucent blood red, making his skin look even more delicate and fair. He raised his hands to hold Jiang Pingji's armpits to prevent her from sliding down. At this moment, his mood was like the spring breeze in March gently caressing the willow branches. His heart almost melted into water. Who asked Xiaoyin to be so insensible? It's rare for me to have the opportunity to travel with you, but the father and daughter just had to join us. It's inconvenient for some things. Jiang Pingji gritted her teeth when she thought of this. She stretched her legs and stepped on the hem of Wei Xi's clothes. Her feet without socks looked even whiter against the layers of stone-colored clothes. Wei Xi's eyes darkened slightly when he saw this. He groped around with his right hand, grabbed the scattered socks, and put them back on for her. Jiang Pingji said, "You too. You don't know what's good for you." Even though Jiang Pingji didn't think it was a big deal to run around in a bikini, for the people of this era, a naked arm and a leg were considered private parts. For those scholars who were introverted on the inside, the lethality of having a pair of feet was even greater than being naked. Wei Xi's nose turned red from her teasing. He pursed his lips, put the socks on for her, and tied the straps. "Sit properly." Jiang Pingji curled her lips and moved to sit not far from him. Wei Xi secretly heaved a sigh of relief. In both his previous and previous lives, he had been a restrained and polite person. In his memory, the matter between a man and a woman should happen at night, and the location should be limited to the room. Even if they flirted during the day, they should only be around each other. What about now? There were indeed only the two of them in the carriage, but there were other people outside. Even though Wei Xi had cultivated for 2 lifetimes, his skin was still not thick enough to support him to do things that were out of line. Jiang Pingji looked at Wei Xi's red earlobes and the thin layer of sweat on the tip of his nose. She couldn't help but smile. In all honesty, she really didn't have the intention to be a beast. Didn't he see that she still had the streaming room open? Even if she wanted to do something to Wei Xi, she would first close the streaming room. I heard that men who are introverted on the inside all have a characteristic. After they are introverted, they will be out of control. Why can't this be applied to you? Jiang Pingji shook her head regretfully. She put her feet on Wei Xi's thighs. I'm waiting for you to take the initiative. Nonsense. It's really rude to tease a gentleman like this. Wei Xiai took a deep breath and silently recited the Qingxin mantra in his heart. He lowered his eyelids and continued to flip through the unfinished book. He was obsessed with reading, unable to extricate himself. He stayed away from beauties and became a saint. Jiang Pingji wouldn't give him the chance to do so. She was bored and used her toes to clamp the silk ribbon that hung on his waist. She listened to the jade ornaments clinking against each other. The sound wasn't loud. It was far from the sound of rolling wheels. However, Wei Xi's ears could only hear the crisp sound of the jade ornaments clinking against each other. His eyes couldn't help but move from the black and white words to the instep of her feet. He was very impatient. Jiang Pingji supported her chin with one hand on the table. Her body was half lying on the cushion of the carriage. Her eyes slid past Wei Xi's fingers. The diamond ring was still on his finger. It was still as shiny as before after years of pulling it out. She smiled and said, "Zixiao, do you still remember the day I gave you the diamond ring?" Wei Xi couldn't help but recall. All kinds of discordant scenes floated past his eyes. Not long after, he was so embarrassed that he blushed. The fire in his heart burned and made him feel uncomfortable. If he couldn't suppress the Qingxin mantra once, he would recite it again. Wei Xi didn't dare to look at her. Chapter 1704. Get a new batch. These words played in Wei Xi's mind over and over again. His previously calm expression turned into one of embarrassment. Both of them were well aware of what to get. Jiang Pingji could say it openly, but Wei Xi, who was a serious person, found it difficult to say it. Nonsense. Wei Xi forced himself to calm down and scolded her in an embarrassed voice. It was as if he was afraid that the walls had ears and could hear their private conversation. It's improper to have sex in broad daylight. Be more serious, don't let others see. After saying that, he raised his hand and put the book aside. With his sharp eyes, he saw that Jiang Pingji had taken off the socks that she had just put on. He grabbed the socks with one hand and grabbed her swaying feet with the other, putting them back on with a serious face. This time it was a dead knot. Let's see how she can get rid of it. Wei Zixiao, you're really hopeless. Jiang Pingji saw that he was still pretending to be a gentleman. She wailed and leaned back. She kicked his thigh with the tip of her foot to vent her anger. Of course, Wei Xi was a real porcelain beauty. She did not dare to use too much strength, lest she accidentally cripple him. Rather than saying that she was venting her anger, it was better to say that she was provoking him or scratching an itch through one's boot. The salted fishes could not stand it anymore. Although Jiang Pingji had a sense of propriety and her actions were not excessive in the salted fish dimension, considering Wei Xi's identity, the salted fishes could not help but break out in cold sweat for him. Killing someone was just a matter of nodding one's head to the ground. Jiang Pingji's method of torturing Wei Xi was to make him suffer a fate worse than death. Tudu Feiqiu, Zixiao is unlucky to meet the streamer. How can a man with high moral standards withstand such provocation? Yi Manqing Mao, this is probably Liu Xiaohui. I feel sorry for Zixiao just by looking at him. Canteen Daffin Auntie, Beauty Ci used his strength to tell everyone that he is a man with integrity. Indeed, he did not move an inch. Everyone was an adult. Some things were tacit. Not to mention that most of the people in the streaming room were experienced drivers. Each one was dirtier than the other. They dared to guarantee with their integrity that these idle fishes were definitely looking for traces of the small tent. Zhou Yuan Buyuan, staring at the crotch of a cat, not moving at all. Pfft, the ancient gods' attainments in Chinese are indeed beyond our reach. You guys are so dirty that it's scary. The host is so petty and easily jealous. Aren't you afraid that she'll close the live broadcast room out of jealousy? What was a jinx? This was probably a jinx. Just as this salted fish finished speaking, the live stream screen went black. Jiang Pingji used her strength to demonstrate how petty and jealous she was. Those who coveted her were not afraid of being served by the god-slaying sword. After walking for a while, they arrived at a slightly run-down relay station before the sun set. Because of the war, this relay station had been abandoned for almost half a year, but it was still habitable after some cleaning. Jiang Pingji used a clumsy excuse that there was only one room in the post station to let Lu Jing and Kong Xintong sleep in the carriage, which baffled them. There was only one room in the relay station. Did she come up with such a clumsy excuse with her toes? However, the situation was stronger than he was. Lu Jing could only swallow 10,000 curses in his heart, not to mention how aggrieved he was. People in ancient times did not have much entertainment. Once the sky turned dark, they would wash up and sleep. The rich could still light a candle and sleep later. Jiang Pingji was not a poor person. Lu Jing had pledged allegiance to her, so he would not be unable to even light a candle. Thus, he lit a lamp and read for a while. At the same time, he checked on Kong Xintong's learning situation for the day. As a strict godfather, he was very strict with his child's education. After a day's journey, the carriage was also bumpy. Kong Xintong was naturally very tired, but she still forced herself to take the test and prepare for the next day's lessons. After burning 2 oil lamps, Lu Jing saw that Kong Xintong could not take it anymore, so he sent her back to her carriage to sleep. Lu Jing was an adult, so he was more energetic than a child. He was not sleepy yet. He wanted to find Wei Ci for a chat, but he realized that Wei Ci was not in his carriage. Lu Jing. Where did Wei Zixiao go? He asked a few retainers who were on night watch. Some shook their heads and said they did not know, while others said that Wei Ci had just left. Lu Zheng's first reaction was that something had happened to Wei Ci. Then, he thought of another possibility. He looked in the direction of the relay station, and his face was as colorful as an overturned seasoning plate. Wei Ci was really in trouble. His chastity had been lost. After all, he was an adult. It was normal for him to have time to do interesting things. However, Lu Jing felt awkward when he thought of their relationship. Unmarried. Lu Lanting is still as shameless as ever. She has even led Zixiao astray, that was what he said, but when he thought of the future young lord, he could only pinch his nose and bear with it. When the future young master was able to hold his own, he would immediately kick this unreliable big pig trotter away. Unfortunately, Lu Zheng's plan could not be achieved in a short period of time. In the pitch-black room, one could not see their own fingers. Only the sound of a kitten's panting could be heard. It sounded like there were 2 people. When the moon was in the middle of the sky, the intermittent noises gradually died down. Not long after, a woman's slightly hoarse laughter could be heard. Didn't Zixiao say that he dared not overstep his boundaries? Wei Ci's heated brain cooled down, and his rationality returned. As he recalled the previous scene, the temperature of his cheeks soared. Jiang Pingji said, "You are allowed to overstep your boundaries in this matter. After all, it requires 2 people to cooperate. We can do more research." Since she said that, Wei Ci could not continue pretending to be deaf and mute. What if outsiders know about this? How can outsiders know about the pleasures of the bedroom? If you are worried about this, then so be it. We might as well cut our hair. One will become a monk, and the other will become a bhikkhuni. We'll cut off our 7 emotions and 6 desires. Since we can't cut off our emotions, we'll be content with our lot and be a secular man and woman. Jiang Pingji said, "I feel that I was not restrained just now." I can better understand what the ancestors said about being like a fish in water. How boring is it to be the same? Innovation is the true principle. Jiang Pingji tried hard to turn Wei Xiai onto the wrong path of being a beast in human clothing, but Wei Xiai had too much integrity. Her efforts were minimal. You're speaking nonsense. Fine, fine, fine. If you say it's nonsense, then it's nonsense. Her bare arms, which were covered in a thin layer of sweat, nimbly circled around his neck. Jiang Pingji took something out of nowhere and dangled it in front of his eyes. The corners of her lips curled up. She smiled like a man-eating female demon, at least in Wei Xi's eyes. The night is long and I can't sleep. Zixiao, can you go to Baiyun village? They fooled around for a long time. It was not until the second half of the night that they fell asleep in each other's arms. The young master that Lu Zheng and the others had been thinking about for a long time was thrown to the ground by Jiang Pingji mercilessly. Tomorrow, they would be burned together and their corpses would be destroyed. It was really so. Chapter 1705. Are you scared? Jiang Pingji sat by the stream and washed her hands. She wiped the god-slaying sword and its scabbard, washing away the bloodstains on them. When she lowered her head to wash her hands, she noticed that Lu Zheng's adopted daughter was looking at her. Jiang Pingji smiled and waved at her, calling her over. Kong Xintong seemed to have woken up from a dream. She seemed to have thought of something. She walked forward with a blushing face and bowed respectfully. I'm not scared. Kong Xintong nodded heavily to make sure that she was not scared. Jiang Pingji used her slightly wet hand to stroke the top of her head. Her movement was not heavy, but it felt heavy and powerful. Even through the hair, one could feel the gentleness from her palm. Kong Xintong did not dare to move, but the blush on her face deepened. I'm scared. I saw that your face was whiter than the white clouds in the sky. Fear is not a shameful emotion, not to mention that you're still a child. Jiang Pingji let Kong Xintong sit beside her. The little girl sat on one side reservedly, her eyes darting around. Kong Xintong said, I'm really scared, but Master Lanting is here. I'm not afraid of anything. Jiang Pingji looked at the undisguised adoration and joy in her eyes. She could not help but smile. Well, if Xiaoyi knew, he would be furious. The daughter he raised with so much effort was stolen by me. Jiang Pingji shook off the water on her hands, wiped the water off the god-slaying sword with a handkerchief, and put it back into the scabbard. Kong Xintong said, my adoptive father admires Master Lanting very much. He speaks highly of you in private. Jiang Pingji could not help but laugh. Little girl, Lu Zheng will cry if he hears this. Thinking of the Red Lotus Saint girl that Wei Xiai mentioned, Jiang Pingji felt that the little girl in front of her was cuter. There were countless possibilities in life. She hoped that Kong Xintong's path would lead to happiness. Master Lanting, Jiang Pingji responded and gestured for Kong Xintong to continue. Kong Xintong took a deep breath and said with a blushing face, do I have the talent to learn martial arts? Didn't you learn literature from your adoptive father? I heard him mention that you seem to have a grand ambition to compete with the world scholars. One can't multitask. No matter how talented you are, you might not be able to achieve your goal if you share some of it with other areas. Kong Xintong said, this servant can sleep 2 hours less every day. Nonsense. You're still growing at such a young age. If you sleep less than 2 hours, you won't be able to grow taller. Kong Xintong lowered her head dejectedly and stared at the wooden clogs on her feet. Why do you want to learn martial arts? Jiang Pingji was more patient with her children, and Kong Xintong was no exception. I'm afraid that even a divine general can't compare to your heroic bearing just now. I'm very pleased. The passionate confession did not have a trace of the muddy color of the adult world, it was pure and passionate. Without waiting for Jiang Pingji to react, salted fish in the streaming room started jeering. Gue kai guo fengxiu, in this live streaming room that sells dog meat, you can watch any of your cute scenes except for the harem fights. Whether it was the gay love between two men, the passion between a man and a woman, or the love between a woman and a woman, there were many kinds of explosive news, and you could choose from them. It's not that I want to criticize you, but can you control your hormones? Don't mess with children. The Lord of Destiny, I don't believe that this is a proper streaming room anymore, and the host is even more so not a proper host, Xiaoshuo Wushuang, spending all my money to buy a new batch of CP shares, even though it's bound to be a loss, I won't regret it. Jiang Pingji laughed and said, just because of this reason. Even though her goal was Hua Yuan, it was also true that she wanted to eradicate the civil unrest along the way. Nanxing was a vast territory. Jiang Pingji's army had conquered the whole of Nanxing in name, but there were still many places that were uninformed that were occupied by rebels and bandits. The local people were being bullied. She had just defeated a group of more than 1,000 rebels. The rebels were a group of unorganized and undisciplined mobs, so she got rid of them quickly and easily. However, there was not much difference in the number of people on both sides, so a wave of bandits rushed in. Jiang Pingji could only clean them up along the way. Coincidentally, this scene fell into Kang Xintong's eyes. She did not know what the girl was thinking, but she came over to tell her that she wanted to learn martial arts. Kang Xintong blinked, her eyes filled with determination. I also want to wield a knife and a sword. If an accident happens, I will at least be able to protect myself. Her foster father could draw his sword, but she was a burden. She had no other choice but to hide in the carriage. What she could not accept was not the corpses of the rebels. It was not facing death directly, but facing death without any ability to resist. Jiang Pingji said, if you want to learn, get your foster father to hire a martial arts master for you. Kang Xintong said, a martial arts master. It's best if it's a retired martial arts master from the women's battalion. The killing methods they learn are more suitable for women to study. Kang Xintong nodded, but a sense of disappointment flashed in her eyes. Jiang Pingji said, the methods that the women's battalion soldiers learn are all passed down by me. When Kang Xintong heard this, her eyes lit up again. She smiled and revealed a pair of small dimples. When Lu Jing heard that Kang Xintong wanted to learn martial arts, he frowned, as if he did not agree. If she wanted to learn something else without learning it well, wouldn't she achieve nothing? It's good that she learns it. It's impossible for her to be alone forever, and she won't always be safe from danger. It's always good to have some life-saving methods. Lu Jing sighed and tacitly agreed to it. It just so happened that there were women's battalion soldiers accompanying them. They could help Kang Xintong build her foundation. When they arrived in Ningzhou, they killed countless rebels and bandits along the way. Jiang Pingji drank some water to moisten her lips. She sent someone to Hua Yuan's old house and the vicinity of the tribe's land to find out if there were any similar people. Her luck was better. The trip was not in vain. There were indeed people who saw people who looked like Hua Yuan. Let's go and take a look tomorrow. It was the time when the seasons changed. The weather was getting colder day by day. There was even a light drizzle in the morning. Lu Jing asked Kang Xintong to wait at the courier station. They went out together, bringing only 4 guards with them to ensure their safety. Jiang Pingji and the rest changed into inconspicuous clothes and went to the residence of the lunatic according to the villagers. Although it was called a residence, it was actually an abandoned, run-down temple. It did not block the wind or the rain. Thinking of the wind last night, the rain this morning, and Hua Yuan's current state, Wei Ci was mentally prepared. After all, he had the experience from his previous life. Jiang Pingji and Lu Zheng were also mentally prepared, but after all, they did not see it with their own eyes. Reality and imagination were different. It's quiet here. As they walked up the rugged mountain road, they could vaguely see wisps of smoke halfway up the mountain. There was a small village with less than 30 households there. As they walked closer, they could see the shadows of people walking around. Not far from the village was a run-down temple. From afar, Jiang Pingji could hear the children's laughter, as well as the low roars of beasts. The more the beast roared and struggled, the more innocent the children laughed. Chapter 1706. Chia. Chia. Let's go. You've ridden enough. Now it's my turn. Why isn't this lunatic walking anymore? I won't give you anything to eat if you don't. Crawl. As they got closer, even Wei Ci and the other commoners could hear the commotion in the dilapidated temple. A few children seemed to be arguing about something. Salted fish in the streaming room had a vague feeling that a storm was brewing. There were fewer bullet screens on the screen, and only 1 or 2 lines occasionally floated by. Jiang Pingji said in a low voice, "Let's go." Lu Jing vaguely guessed something. His originally brisk footsteps suddenly became heavy, and some hesitation flashed across his face. As they got closer to the dilapidated temple, everyone could see what was happening through the cracked walls of the temple. Jiang Pingji's face suddenly darkened. Among them, only Wei Ci remained calm. Because in his previous life, he saw a completely unfamiliar Hua Yuan at the same place, at a different time, in the same dilapidated temple. When he found Hua Yuan in his previous life, he was completely crazy. The children in the nearby villages teased him and rode him like a beast. If they were happy, they would tease him. If they were unhappy, they would hit him with stones. They played a game of heroes killing ferocious beasts. The children played the heroes, and Hua Yuan was the ferocious beast that they killed. These children were naturally evil. When they were naughty, they would put their urine and feces in broken pottery bowls and tease Hua Yuan to drink or eat. Rotten eggs, dead rats, cockroaches, bedbugs, stones, and even pig and dog feces were the children's tools for pranks. Hua Yuan, who was teased by them, would only laugh foolishly. If he was bullied, he would only whine helplessly like a cub and struggle meaninglessly. Even though Wei Ci had a grudge against Hua Yuan in his previous life, he could not help but soften when he saw this scene. He used to be a person who stirred up a storm, but now he ended up like this. He did not want to lose his mind, and all his evil deeds went against his conscience. He was like a puppet controlled by others all his life, and he had no control over himself. He did not know how the real Hua Yuan would feel when he woke up and saw himself in such a pathetic state. Wei Ci had once softened and tried to take care of Hua Yuan. On the second day, he received news that Hua Yuan had died in front of his deceased parents' graves. Perhaps death was the true release. He never thought that a similar scene would play out before his eyes for the second time. "What are you doing?" Jiang Pingji strode into the dilapidated temple. The 5 children of different ages were startled. They saw a few nobles in clean clothes standing outside the dilapidated temple. They could tell at a glance that they were not ordinary people. The one in front was very scary. They screamed and wanted to escape. One of them was riding on a beggar with unkempt hair and a dirty face. His legs were short and he couldn't move fast. When he turned over, he was so scared that he fell down. If it were anyone else, they probably wouldn't bother with a few children. Jiang Pingji was different. The child who escaped quickly was caught by the servants. The chubby boy bumped into her and she lifted him up by the collar. Children were the most sensitive. They could sense Jiang Pingji's aura more clearly. That was why Jiang Pingji liked children, but they didn't like her very much. The chubby boy's reaction was even more realistic. He didn't know how to struggle after being caught. He was so scared that he kept crying. 2 streams of tears rolled down his face, and milky white mucus flowed down his dirty nostrils and into his mouth. Lu Zheng's eyelids twitched. He was worried that Jiang Pingji wouldn't control her strength and pinch the children to death. The other children were caught by the servants. One of them was still naked. Judging from his previous actions, he had just peed on the beggar in the dilapidated temple. It was true that Jiang Pingji liked children, but she didn't like the kind that disgusted her. Beat them up and teach them a lesson. If their parents can't teach them well, don't blame others for teaching them. The servants did as they were told, but they controlled their strength. They only beat them until they cried, but they wouldn't hurt their muscles or bones. Their movements alarmed the villagers nearby. One by one, they came over with a hoe, trying to get Jiang Pingji to release the children. Seeing the clothes and the swords hanging on their waists, the villagers were terrified again. Jiang Pingji didn't do anything to the villagers. She just let them take the children back so they could discipline them. If these little bastards were older. Humph. Jiang Pingji snorted. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was full of killing intent. Hua Yuan felt like he had a long and terrible nightmare. The scenes were intermittent. He could see clearly, but he couldn't control his body. He couldn't wake up. That was until a terrifying aura approached him, and the ice-cold touch made him quiver. His muddled mind suddenly became clear. Hua Yuan's face was blank for a moment. After a while, he looked like he was about to cry, or maybe he couldn't cry anymore. Hua Yuan. An unfamiliar female voice came to his ears. Hua Yuan raised his head and looked. He was in a trance. This person, Master Lanting. Even though they had only met once many years ago, Jiang Pingji was a woman with a unique charm. It was hard to forget. Even though they hadn't seen each other for many years, he could still recognize her. Behind Jiang Pingji, Lu Zheng's face was full of disbelief. He didn't expect the dirty, ragged beggar in front of him to be Hua Yuan. His right foot seemed to be broken. The wound on his ankle had been soaked in the muddy puddle of the dilapidated temple and was rotting. Jiang Pingji said, "Yes." Hua Yuan looked a little uneasy. He smiled bitterly and said, "I'm sorry to have let you see such an indecent scene." Jiang Pingji asked, "Have you regained your senses?" Hua Yuan sighed and said, "The illness of insanity will only end when one dies. I'm still clear-minded for a moment, but I might go crazy again after a while." He didn't seem surprised by his situation. His cloudy eyes also became clear. There was relief in his eyes, and some of his former elegance could be seen. "You know why I'm here?" Hua Yuan said calmly, "I can guess a little, but I still have some regrets. I hope you can help me." His wish was not excessive. He just wanted to freshen up by the stream, change into a clean set of clothes, and pay his respects in front of his parents' grave. Jiang Pingji asked the servant to give him an extra set of clothes. After washing up, Hua Yuan was no longer in a sorry state, but he looked more than 10 years older than before. His hair was mostly white. Lu Jing said to Wei Xi in a low voice, "Look at him. He can't even say half a word about the speech he prepared." No matter how much he hated Hua Yuan, he had to admit that Hua Yuan was quite a character. He could stir up trouble not long ago, but now, Wei Xi asked him, "Your heart has softened?" Lu Jing said, "What's the point of being calculative with a lunatic who's always acting crazy? I don't even have the energy to think about it." "Your heart has softened, but he wants to die." Lu Zheng was stunned. Chapter 1707. Hua Yuan supported himself with a tree branch and limped up the mountain. His crippled leg could only drag on the ground. Because the mountain road was rugged and difficult to walk on, he was so tired that his forehead was sweating and his chapped lips curled up. Lu Jing glanced at him and couldn't bear to look away. Outsiders felt sorry for him, but Hua Yuan seemed to have lost his sense of pain. There was no expression of pain on his face, but some relief and urgency. The closer he got to his destination, the more urgent his steps became. He even hopped on one leg for the last few steps. No one made a sound, but one of the squires accidentally stepped on something while walking, making a cracking sound. Hearing the movement, Jiang Pingji turned her head and glanced at it. She found that the squire had stepped on a piece of dirty human bone buried in the mud. Hua Yuan wasn't surprised. He turned around and walked over. He squatted down and picked up the bone that the squire had stepped on. His expression was somewhat absent-minded. He sighed and said, "After the disaster of Nanman, everyone felt insecure and uneasy. Our clansmen had to move away to avoid the disaster. Only a few loyal servants stayed behind to take care of the ancestral house and guard the clan's graves to prevent the people nearby from going up the mountain to dig up the graves." He said it calmly, but the others reacted differently. Lu Jing looked down and Jiang Pingji was expressionless. Lu Jing secretly observed Jiang Pingji from the corner of his eyes. Jiang Pingji had done this many times. There were many gold rating officers under her command. When she fought with Enchui previously, she relied on this method to alleviate the shortage of rations. Because of this, she angered the Nanxing aristocrats in Fan province and other places. The Nanxing family rebelled and was finally wiped out by her. Yu Wu Fingqi, ha, Lu Zheng's eyesight is amazing. Lover Zicheng Shumei, I really want to stuff the microphone into the streamer's mouth and interview her about her current mood. Ren Konghong, there's no need for an interview. I bet on the streamer's integrity. She must be smiling on the outside but cursing in her heart. Jin Tian Jigging, it seems that the streamer has dug up more graves than Boss Chow. Do you know about gold rating officers? Jiang Pingji was a model worker among the streamers. She had been in the wind and rain for so many years. She was occasionally delayed, but she was never absent. The salted fishes had practically watched her grow from the age of 12 to the present. They had witnessed her development and growth for more than 10 years, so they knew her inside out. When she gave the order to dig up the graves to replenish the military supplies, many of the salted fish expressed their opposition, but most of them chose to remain silent. It wasn't that the salted fish were cold and heartless, it was just that their rationality told them that Jiang Pingji's behavior was not wrong in the context of her era. As spectators, all they could do was send bullet screens to watch the show. They could not control Jiang Pingji's life. Things had changed with the passage of time. Now that this matter was brought up again, the salted fishes could only laugh and laugh. Hua Yuan didn't seem to notice the awkwardness in the atmosphere. He continued to speak in a hoarse voice, "There are a few villages on the mountain and at the foot of the mountain. In the villages, there are often hooligans who don't work in production but do some shady business. They sneak up the mountain to dig robbers' holes and steal the funerary items from the tombs to sell. If that was all, then it was fine. If the dead can be buried with the living, it can be considered as accumulating good karma after death. Unfortunately, most of the villagers are despicable and greedy. Not only do they steal the funerary items on the outside of the coffin, but they also want to take the things inside the coffin. In the end, they even split the coffin and used it to make fire. It's a pity for these poor people. They were famous for a time when they were alive, but they died without a burial place." On this point, Jiang Pingji could be considered to have moral integrity. The gold rating officers did dig up graves and steal money, but they wouldn't go so far as to remove the things worn on the bodies and not even leave a coffin behind. Of course, this was just the pot calling the kettle black. There was no difference in essence. The grave of Hua Yuan's parents was also destroyed. There was a robber's hole that had been filled in nearby. It looked full of potholes. Even though it had been destroyed beyond recognition, one could still see the wealth of the deceased when they were alive. This was not a standard that ordinary people could have. Most of the graves nearby were overgrown with weeds, and some were even used as nests by small animals. Only the grave of Hua Yuan's parents looked rather clean. The weeds around it had been carefully pulled out, and there were no bones scattered outside. There seemed to be no need to guess who had tidied it up. Hua Yuan looked at the grave. He seemed to be in a trance. His eyes were filled with tears. His parents had died of the plague when he was young. His uncle and aunt had taken advantage of his young age and stolen his family's wealth. They had caused him to live in pain from a young age to a young man. If the plague had taken him away, he wouldn't have had to suffer for more than 30 years. Hua Yuan knelt in front of his parents' grave and whispered. Jiang Pingji didn't disturb him. She just watched quietly and treated herself as the background. After about a quarter of an hour, Hua Yuan's eyebrows relaxed. It was as if a burden had been lifted from his heart. His breathing became stable. Hua Yuan bowed to Jiang Pingji and said sincerely, "Thank you, Master Lanting." Jiang Pingji said, "Do you know that when you lost your mind, you called yourself Lu Shi?" Hua Yuan wasn't surprised by her question. Apart from that, he couldn't think of any other reason why a noble would appear before him. "I didn't know about it before. I only found out about it later." Hua Yuan's breathing fluctuated as he talked about it. He seemed to be suppressing his emotions, but his eyes revealed his true feelings. Remorse and pain almost drowned him. Of course, these emotions weren't directed at Jiang Pingji. They were directed at other people, such as the young master he treated like his own, his chief of the Public Security Bureau, and the people who had died directly or indirectly at his hands. He didn't intend for those people to die, but he did cause them to die. Hua Yuan didn't want to explain himself. He only wanted to seek relief through death. "Can I see him?" Jiang Pingji's suggestion was beyond Hua Yuan's expectations. His expression froze in shock. "It's not impossible, but..." "Master Lanting, you don't know. That thing seems to be especially afraid of you." Hua Yuan could wake up and temporarily regain his sanity because Jiang Pingji's breathing was close. Jiang Pingji said, "Are you saying that you can't make him come out?" Hua Yuan said shamefully, "This isn't something I can control. If he could control the appearance of those annoying personalities, he wouldn't have ended up like this." Jiang Pingji said, "If that's the case, it's a pity." When she first met Hua Yuan, she could tell that there were many personalities in his body. Now that she looked at him again, those messy personalities were gone. What replaced them was a muddy and broken, secondary personality. It was like the product of the personalities devouring each other. This secondary personality was probably the so-called Lu Shi. Even if he was awakened, he would still be an irrational monster. "I'm not that crazy to kill my own child in front of my parents' graves. I'll give you a chance. End it yourself." Jiang Pingji's hand, which was on the god-slaying sword, dropped. She threw a dagger to Hua Yuan. Hua Yuan looked at the dagger and smiled. Chapter 1708. Be careful, my lord. The change happened in an instant. Just as Jiang Pingji turned around, Hua Yuan, who had picked up the dagger, suddenly had a ferocious look on his face. He held the dagger in his hand and was about to stab Jiang Pingji in the back. Wei Xiai and the rest were a little further away and could not rush to escort the emperor at this distance. They could only shout out a warning. The idle audience sitting in front of the screen was scared out of their wits. Before they could scream, Jiang Pingji, who was ambushed by Hua Yuan, seemed to have grown a pair of eyes on the back of her head. She unsheathed her god-slaying sword and hit Hua Yuan's wrist with the back of the sword, knocking the dagger out of his hand. Looking at Hua Yuan, who looked like a completely different person, Jiang Pingji said, "You're out," suppressing the primary personality in an instant. This secondary personality that called itself Lu Shi was really tenacious and scheming. At this moment, Hua Yuan's expression was ferocious. His gaze was fierce, and he let out a beast-like growl from his throat. The retainer reacted and quickly subdued Hua Yuan. How could Hua Yuan, who was almost at the end of his rope, compare to a few strong retainers? Naturally, he was suppressed to the point where he couldn't get up. Give it back to me. Hua Yuan, no, Lu Shi, the secondary personality, stared at Jiang Pingji's face with hatred and hatred. Jiang Pingji asked him calmly. Return what to you? Return my body to me. I am Lu Shi. I am the ruler of the world. I am. You are not, I am. He opened his fingers and tried to grab the corner of Jiang Pingji's clothes, but she looked at him with pity. You don't even know who you are. Don't you think that's too sad? How could the other party be willing to listen to what she said? He tried for a long time but still couldn't get close. In the end, he could only roar in pain. The red veins that covered his eyes made him look especially terrifying. Even when he was out of control, he was still quite strong. The squire had no choice but to use extreme measures. One of them pressed down on Hua Yuan's head and forced him to lower his head. You monster! You've taken over my body. You're the monster. His voice carried the hoarseness of a wild beast. Even though he was restrained by several subordinates, he still used all of his strength to resist. Go catch her. She's a monster. Lu Zheng and Wei Ci caught up to them. They were so frightened that their breathing was in disorder. Their faces were still full of shock. Is the Lord all right? Why did Hua Yuan suddenly lose his mind? The scene from before was truly too thrilling. Who could have imagined that Hua Yuan would suddenly launch a sneak attack? If not for the Lord's superb martial arts, she would have been ambushed. Just thinking about that scene, Wei Ci's face was as pale as a wall that had been painted white. Jiang Pingji comforted them with a gentle voice. Don't worry, a mere madman can't hurt me. Don't you know how powerful I am? Not to mention that Jiang Pingji was always on guard. Even if she was defenseless, the opponent would not be able to hurt her at all. Wei Ci secretly glanced at the deranged Hua Yuan and suggested in a low voice. Your Highness, you should hand him over to Ci and Xiao Yin to deal with. He still had a lingering fear from the scene just now. He was really worried that something bad would happen again. Jiang Pingji waved her hand and refused. She would be even more worried if the two of them were to face the crazy Hua Yuan. It doesn't matter. I have something to say to him. I'll be fine after I'm done. Wei Ci and Xiao Yin could not argue with her, so they could only obey her orders and retreat. Before the entourage retreated, he used hemp rope to tie Hua Yuan up. He used a lot of strength and almost lost a lot of weight. Jiang Pingji looked at Hua Yuan, who was unable to break free, and the corners of her lips curled into an unfriendly smile. She used a volume that only the two of them could hear and asked, You said you are Lu Shi? Hua Yuan's second personality stared at Jiang Pingji with a venomous gaze, as if he wanted to use his eyes to kill her. I said you are pitiful. You really are pitiful. You've lived such a painful life that you can't tell the real from the fake. Jiang Pingji did not mind. Instead, she smiled and squatted down to eye level with him. Lu Shi died at the age of 12. The person in front of you who is using the identity of Lu Shi is someone you don't even know. Tell me, are you Lu Shi or the me in front of you? This personality, to be precise, should be the Jiang Pingji, in Hua Yuan's imagination. The reason why he called himself Lu Shi was that Jiang Pingji's real identity had never been made public. What do you mean? The second personality panted as if he wanted to see through Jiang Pingji's facade. Jiang Pingji said, I mean there is no Lu Shi in this world. If there is no Lu Shi, then who are you? You lied to me. Jiang Pingji sneered. Whether I lied to you or not, shouldn't you know best in your heart? As she spoke, she reached out and touched the space between his eyebrows with 2 fingers. It was a simple action, but it made the other's body tremble uncontrollably. What are you trying to do? He tried to turn his face away from her hand, but he failed repeatedly. Go to sleep. Everything will be over when you wake up. As soon as she finished speaking, the second personality felt a force pulling him out of his body. His limbs and bones were in excruciating pain. Demon, sorcery. After a while, Jiang Pingji's hand clenched into a fist, as if she was holding something in her palm. She exerted a little force and crushed it. The second personality only had time to let out a short and sharp scream before he quickly calmed down. After that, Jiang Pingji's gaze did not leave Hua Yuan. She watched as his eyes turned from cloudy to clear and his rationality returned. When he realized what had happened, Hua Yuan could only smile bitterly. I, Master Lanting, have failed to live up to your good intentions. Jiang Pingji had kindly given him a chance to kill himself to preserve his dignity. She did not expect the second personality to jump out and cause trouble. After all the twists and turns, she still had to do it herself. If there is a next life, open your eyes wide and reincarnate into a good one. She did not like Hua Yuan, but most of her disgust was directed at the second personality who stirred up trouble. Compared to her, the main personality was somewhat innocent. Hua Yuan heaved a sigh of relief. Thank you. As he was about to die, he did not mourn. Instead, he smiled in relief. To him, death was liberation and a new lease of life. As soon as he finished speaking, a dazzling white light flashed before his eyes. His neck felt slightly cold. Before he could even feel the pain, his head had already fallen to the ground. Go and bury his body. Build a new grave next to his parents. If we leave him alone, he will most likely become dinner for the beasts nearby. Jiang Pingji sheathed the god-slaying sword and ordered her entourage, gather a complete corpse for him. When they descended the mountain, Wei Xiai saw that his lord was still pursing her lips. He thought she was still angry about Hua Yuan. My lord, you don't seem to be in a good mood. Is it because of Hua Yuan? Jiang Pingji said, half of it is, and the other half is not. According to Wei Xiai, Hua Yuan had lost his mind in his previous life. However, the fact that he had split into a Lu Shi in this life made Jiang Pingji somewhat concerned. She had personally come to take a look, thinking that there would be some clues. She did not expect it to be simple schizophrenia. Chapter 1709. Nanxing was the unluckiest of the 5 countries in the world. First, Nanxing was destroyed and the Nan Man massacred. Then, the feudal lords rose up and formed an alliance to fight against the barbarians. After more than 10 years of war, all the prefectures were in a state of waiting for development, but from time to time, mobs and bandits would cause trouble. Jiang Pingji had the intention to govern, but it was a long project that could not be solved in 2 or 3 days. Everything had to be done in a down-to-earth manner, one step at a time. After dealing with Hua Yuan's matter, Jiang Pingji was not in a hurry to leave Ningzhou with her people because something was holding her back. The flood in Ningzhou is so serious. Jiang Pingji and her people temporarily stayed in the prefecture government of Ningzhou. The prefecture government had not been renovated for many years. It looked worse than the private houses of ordinary merchants. Fortunately, the prefecture government was not a jerry-built project. It could still be lived in after some cleaning. Jiang Pingji stayed there for 2 days. When she was free, she thought that the prefecture government should have the files of previous years. It was also the best way to understand the situation in Ningzhou. She ordered people to sort out the files that had piled up in the state mansion. As soon as they opened the storeroom, they were shocked. Piles and piles of files were haphazardly piled up, with a thick layer of dust on them. The rancid air inside was so choking that it was hard to breathe. They sorted out the files in the warehouse for 2 days before moving them out. Many of the files had been destroyed by moths. They sorted them out and put them away. Jiang Pingji picked them and looked at them. She did not know if she did not look, but she was shocked when she saw them. Not only were there unjust and false cases that had piled up for many years, but there were also a large number of flood records. After looking at them, Jiang Pingji knew that there would be floods in Ningzhou every few years. It would be fine if the floods did not come, but when they did, the mountains would be flooded. Countless people would die and many crops would not be spared. Jiang Pingji asked them to find the bamboo slips related to the flood control. In the end, she was speechless to find that there were not even 10% of such records. Many of the contents were perfunctory. Only after a lot of effort to sort them out did they come up with some useful information. Zixiao, send someone to find out if there are people who have lived in Ningzhou for a long time. Ask them about the flood situation over the years. Lu Jing asked, controlling the flood is not a short-term task. It consumes a lot of manpower, material resources, and financial resources. How long do you plan to stay here? She had to prioritize. The flood did not happen every year, and it would not be effective in 1 or 2 years. Instead of wasting time here, Jiang Pingji might as well do something else and take complete control of Nanxing as soon as possible. If she delayed for too long, Zhongzhou would recover, and she would miss the best opportunity to reclaim Zhongzhou. Lu Jing still did not know what Qiguan Rang and Sun Wen had done to Zhongzhou. The information was not on the same level, so his considerations were somewhat incorrect. If he had known that these 2 deities were stirring up trouble in Zhongzhou, causing the entire nation to be in turmoil, he probably wouldn't have said this. Jiang Pingji said, it's precisely because the flood control mission involves so much that I'm even more worried about handing it over to people I'm not familiar with. I'm afraid that they won't do a good job. At the very least, it's better to understand the details and strive to have a clear idea of what's going on. Then, I'll hand it over to someone else so that I don't have to worry about the other party deceiving me. There would be no more wars in the short term. Jiang Pingji wanted to buy as much time as possible to restore the livelihood of the local people and let them settle down. He who wins the hearts of the people will win the world. As long as the people were loyal to her, she was not afraid that the people in the rear would be egged on to rebel. Lu Jing saw that Jiang Pingji had her own plans. Out of his trust in her, he stopped trying to persuade her. After 2 days of investigation and sorting out, Jiang Pingji basically found out the source of the flood in Ningzhou. She was angry and amused at the same time. The destruction of Nanxing is really self-inflicted. You can't blame it all on the 4 factions of Nanman. Their roots are rotten. If they were to die, they would die later. The 4 factions of Nanman would just send Nanxing to heaven earlier. The flood in Ningzhou was not about anything else. It was mainly about the blockage of the river and the officials' connivance with the gentry clans occupying the riverbed near the flood discharge channel. Some people even transported soil to make farmland. Coupled with the accumulation of silt in the downstream river, the water system in Ningzhou was becoming more and more blocked. During the rainy season, it was fine if the rain was normal, but once it exceeded the normal amount, it was easy to cause a flood. The river would flow backwards and drown the crops. Before Nanxing was destroyed, Ningzhou would allocate a sum of money to control the flood every year and regularly send people to dredge the river. Even though there were cases of corruption and bribery, God gave face. There were occasional floods, but the scale was not large. Since the destruction of Nanxing, each prefecture and county had to endure the invasion of Nanman and face the domination of the local forces. Naturally, no one would allocate money to clean up the river. In the eyes of many short-sighted people, cleaning up the river was like throwing money into the river. It only made a sound, but it did not make money. The consequences of doing so came quickly. During the more than 10 years of war, Ningzhou had 2 major floods and 5 minor floods. About 10,000 people died. Over the years, the value of the crops lost was nearly 1 million strings of coins. According to the descriptions of the villagers, the floods in the past few years were getting worse. This year's luck was good. There was not much rainfall during the rainy season and there was no movement in the river. But next year, it was hard to say. Jiang Pingji asked someone to take her to various blocked river channels to take a look. When she came back, she drew a simple picture. It's not practical to directly clean up the main river channel. We don't have enough time, money, and manpower, Jiang Pingji said. It's better to clean up these few tributaries first and expand the river to share the pressure of the main river channel. When we have time, we can dredge the main river channel. Jiang Pingji circled a few more places and said, it's better to change these few turns and straighten them so that the flood discharge will be smoother. Lu Jing did not have much of an opinion. Who do you plan to hand over to, my lord? The original government office in Ningzhou had collapsed. Before Jiang Pingji attacked, the internal affairs of Ningzhou were controlled by the local gentry. It was almost like a local court. She cleaned up a wave and got rid of the vermin, but there was no one available. Jiang Pingji thought about it and said, didn't we issue a recruitment order a while ago? The first batch of conscription has been issued. Pick a few reliable people from them. Oh right, that person called me you is not bad. I remember that one of the questions in her answer sheet was to simulate how to manage the river channel. Her hypothetical suggestion is quite feasible. It's not just an armchair strategist. It can be seen that this person is also a man of action. He's worth putting in an important position. Jiang Pingji never cared about the background or qualifications of the people she hired. She only looked at their sense of responsibility and ability. Although this kind of employment system was not in line with this era, Jiang Pingji was the one who made the rules. Only others obeyed her. There was no reason for her to compromise. In a few words, Jiang Pingji decided to hand over the affairs of Ningzhou to Miyu, a greenhorn. I'll write a letter asking her to come over and take up the post. When she comes, we'll leave. Even if Miyu had confidence in herself, when this letter of appointment was placed in front of her, she felt like she was dreaming. Chapter 17:10. Milady, is this true? When it was time for dinner, the concubine delivered a sumptuous meal to Miyu on time. Unexpectedly, she was staring at a letter of appointment in a daze. She casually asked what was written on it, and Miyu said that it was a letter of appointment from Duke Lanting ordering her to take up her post in Ning province. The concubine was shocked. Miyu said, this letter of appointment was personally handed to me by Duke Lanting's trusted aide, so it can't be fake. It's just that, the concubine finished for her. It's just that you think this good news came too suddenly. Miyu sighed, although I have ambitions, I also know my own limits. This was indeed a good thing that fell from the sky, but Miyu was worried that she would be crushed to death by the pie before she could eat it. The concubine smiled, this is the first time I've heard Milady say such unconfident words. In the concubine's impression, this first madam of her family was a capable person. No matter what she encountered, she always seemed to have a well-thought-out plan, and no matter how difficult the problem was, she could easily solve it. This isn't something that can be solved with confidence alone. I've never met the Duke of Lanting before, and the only thing he knows about me is that recruitment event. Just how daring does he have to be to entrust such an important task to a person he doesn't even know of? Miku said. The concubine didn't understand the affairs of the bureaucracy, but from what Miyu said, it didn't seem like a good thing. Then what should we do? Could there be other secrets to this matter? Is he trying to capture Milady to bear the blame? The concubine was a little anxious. She was really worried about Miyu's safety. After all, this family was basically supported by Miyu. If something happened to Miyu, with just that irresponsible man, all the concubines in the backyard would have no one to rely on. Milady, can we reject this matter? We can't just send ourselves to death for nothing. Seeing that the concubine's thoughts were getting more and more ridiculous, Miyu laughed and interrupted her random thoughts. What are you thinking about? I'm just curious about the Duke of Lanting's intentions, but I don't think she's that bad. Michu picked up the letter of appointment from the table and folded it carefully, smoothing every corner of it. This letter was the key to her official career. Whether she would rise to the top or not, it all depended on this letter. Michu said, however, I also heard that the Duke of Lanting is a very unexpected woman. She likes to do things unpredictably, and ordinary people can't predict what she will do. The concubine was comforted by Miyu, but she still looked at her worriedly. We can also look on the bright side. Perhaps the Duke of Lanting really has a sharp eye for talent. He could tell at a glance that your wife is a great talent. This matter is not urgent. Let's eat first. Mikan wasn't confident either, but she didn't want to infect the girl in front of her with her anxiety and worry for nothing. Besides, the Duke of Lanting wouldn't do anything that would ruin her reputation. This is most likely an opportunity for your madam. If I can grasp it, in the future, there will definitely be a place for me. The concubine didn't understand these things, but since Mikan said so, she could only believe it. After dinner, the candle in Mikan's study didn't go out. It burned until the sun rose the next day. Mikan spent the whole night flipping through the books and notes related to flood control. She reviewed every part and extracted useful content to compile into a booklet. The rest of the time, she searched for information related to Ningzhou. Only by doing her homework could one know oneself and the enemy, and win 100 battles. However, staying up late was the result of being depressed. She slept for 4 hours, freshened up, and hurried to the prefecture's government office. Before Mikan arrived, Feng Yu mentioned her to Yang Si. Outsiders didn't understand Jiang Pingji, but they had been serving her for nearly a decade. They knew what kind of person their lord was. Jiang Pingji never did useless things. Since she chose Mikan, it must be because she was competent, not because of other reasons. However, in the eyes of outsiders, it was probably not a surprise, but a shock. The Lord's letter of appointment probably scared that person. He hasn't come to take the roll call at this time. Could he have been scared away? As it was nearing mealtime, Yang Si had the kitchen serve the food. Nanqing's food was different from Dongqing's. The latter had a heavier taste, while the former had a lighter taste. The cooking was also more exquisite. Wherever Jiang Pingji went to war, he would search for delicacies. Recently, he even planned to write a book about his experiences in food. The world was big, but eating was the most important. Feng Zhen's sarcasm reached his ears, but it only stayed for a few seconds before he deleted it. Yang Si, did you hear what I said? Yang Si said, I did. Feng Zhen said, then tell me, when will Mikan come? Yang Si took a sip of the soup. The soup was fragrant but not greasy. When he swallowed it, the fragrance lingered in his mouth. It was indeed delicious. Don't you have a wife? Why are you so concerned about me, Can? Feng Zhen, this guy really didn't listen to what he said. Yang Si saw that Feng Zhen's face was showing signs of darkening. He coughed lightly and became slightly more serious. Which of the women that my lord has taken a liking to is simple? This me Can is the same. You don't have to worry about her, Yang Si said. Even if she's a colleague, she's a married woman, and you're a married man. Gossip is a fearful thing. It's never wrong to keep a distance. Yang Si really didn't hear what Feng Zhen said. He thought that this guy's old habits were acting up again, so he reminded him. Feng Zhen's face completely darkened. I'm asking you, did that me can be scared away by my lord's sudden important position? You're thinking too much. Yang Si, his strong desire to live made Yang Si change the topic. Speaking of which, how talented is this me Can that my lord values her so much? She was suddenly promoted to the position of a high-ranking official. Even a celestial monkey wouldn't have such speed. Feng Zhen wasn't that easy to fool. But before he could say anything, someone outside said that Mi Ken was here. The two of them were suspicious. Why is she looking for us instead of going to the roll call ceremony? Let her in. When Mi Ken came, she brought a pile of bamboo slips and cloth. She was here to ask for advice. Yesterday, I received my lord's letter of appointment appointing me to Ning province. I'm terrified and deeply feel that I'm incompetent. I'm afraid that I'll let my lord down. I spent the night looking for a lot of information related to flood control, but I'm inexperienced and there are still many things I don't understand. Mi Ken lowered herself and treated Yang Si and Feng Zhen with even more respect. She didn't have the slightest bit of arrogance and complacency after gaining power. She hadn't been in officialdom before, but she knew that being put in an important position as soon as she arrived would more or less attract the dissatisfaction and hatred of some people. She didn't know what Yang Si and Feng Zhen thought of her, but she knew that she had to correct her attitude and reduce the hatred as much as possible. If she could learn something from the two of them to help her take fewer detours, that would be even better. Feng Zhen and Yang Si looked at each other and understood what the other meant. This Mi Ken was interesting. Chapter 1711. Mi Chu's choice was undoubtedly correct. As an outsider who had been promoted to a high-level position within a few days of the conquest, there were many people who were jealous of her. With Feng Zhen and Yang Si's ideological awareness, they would not argue with her, let alone deliberately suppress Mi Chu. But what about others? Could others trust Jiang Pingji's choice so much that they would not make things difficult for Mi Chu? In places that Mi Chu could not see, there were many people who were jealous and doubtful of her. Some just sneered and watched the show, waiting for her to fall from a high place. Others looked at her with eyes full of prejudice, carefully scanning every inch of her, trying to find evidence that could pull her down from her high horse. These people were still okay, they did not put their malice into action, but there were also people who had already planned to make her never rise again. Her starting point was too high. Many people struggled for years, but did not even reach 1/10 of what she had today. Her starting point was the end point of others. How could she not be jealous, and resentful? Because of this, Mi Chu had to be even more careful not to leave any evidence that others could use against her. As a smart person, Mi Chu naturally understood this logic. She did not dare to neglect important officials like Yang Si and Feng Zhen in the slightest. Even though she was now a hot new noble in the eyes of outsiders, Mi Chu still put on the attitude of a junior and seriously asked for advice. Rather than asking for advice, it was more like the three of them sat together and discussed, exchanging what they needed at the same time. As the exchange deepened, Yang Si and the others found that Michu gave them more surprises than they had imagined. It could be seen that their lord did not choose Michu to go to Ningzhou on a whim. It was indeed because Michu was the most suitable candidate. She had a good attitude, was humble, and was also smart. How could such a colleague not be liked? However, there was one thing that Yang Si did not understand, so he asked. I heard that Su Chun has lived in the inner house for a long time. Why is he so familiar with the rivers everywhere? Not only was he familiar with them, but he had also done a lot of homework. This amount of homework was not something that could be done in one night. It was clearly the experience accumulated over a long period of time, and it also needed to be investigated and understood on the spot. It was not something that could be done on paper. These shouldn't be the focus of the women in the inner house, right? Mi Kuk chatted with Yang Si and the others for more than 2 hours and learned a lot from them. The three of them also changed from the respectful way they used to address each other, calling each other by their first name. The surname Shuchong sounded a little strange, but since it was bestowed by an elder, there should be a deeper meaning behind it. Mi Kuk smiled and said, My grandfather used to be a governor for a few years and was fortunate enough to serve the people for a few years. My father was also once conscripted into the government, but due to his health, he had no choice but to resign. Although the two of them had not been officials for long, they had always been concerned about the common people. As a result, there were many books related to flood control at home. When I was young, I was influenced by my father and learned a lot. I never thought that there would be a day when I would be able to put it to use. When Michu was still a child, her father would often sigh beside her ear. It's a pity that my son is not a man. Otherwise, he would definitely be able to compete with the young talents of the world. Michu was young, but she was very competitive. After she was enlightened, she was often praised by her elders, so she couldn't bear to hear even the slightest negative comment. Her father acknowledged her talent but rejected her because of her gender. This made Michu very unhappy, so she immediately retorted. Father, your daughter is better at learning than anyone else, why can't I fight for it? Her cousins were all older than her, but none of them were as smart as she was. Even though they were enlightened a few years earlier than her, they were still beaten by her. Michu's father sighed and stroked his daughter's head. Although my daughter is ambitious, the women of the world will eventually have to marry and have children, living in the inner courtyard. What does a woman in the inner courtyard need to learn? At most, she'll just have to help her husband teach her children, give her needlework, and do some favors. Michu angrily slammed the bamboo scroll on the table. Your daughter doesn't want to learn those things. Of course, you don't have to learn them now. But when you reach the age of 15 and are getting married, you'll still have to learn them well. Despite her young age, Michu had a good memory. Even now, she still remembered what her father had told her back then. As she grew older, Michu continued to be a top student. Those peers who were defeated by her couldn't catch up to her, so they used words to attack her. What's the point of a girl learning so many classics? No matter how well you learn, you'll still have to marry and have children. The inner courtyard doesn't have any use for these things, so isn't it a waste of time for you to learn them? You might as well learn the 4 arts. In the future, you'll be able to play the zither and flute together with your future husband, appreciating poetry and painting together. If you learn these wild things, how will your future husband's family be satisfied with you as their daughter-in-law? What a fool. Even if I learn it, it's useless. It's a waste of time and energy. While other girls of her age were chasing butterflies, admiring flowers, or boating on the lake, Michigan Chu did nothing but study. Studying was a tough job, so how could Michu enjoy it? But she couldn't take this lying down. If she gave up halfway, what kind of faces would these people secretly use to mock and ridicule her? She had studied for so many years, so why did they say useless was really useless? Who set this rule? Could it be those men who were inferior to her in every aspect, who had nothing but jealousy, and sarcasm? Why was Mi Chu still unable to forget her late husband? Because he was the first person Mi Chu had met who understood and respected her. Not only were they husband and wife, but they were also close friends who shared the same ideals. In comparison, her current husband was really useless except for his face. Mi Chu chatted with Feng Zhen and the others for several hours. Both of them learned a lot, and their impressions of each other gradually improved. After she left, Yang Si said with a smile, "Fortunately, Su Chun is a woman, and our Lord is also a woman. Otherwise, both sides would be at a disadvantage." What disadvantage? Naturally, it would be the loss of her reputation. If Jiang Pingji was a man and put Mi Chu in an important position right from the start, not only would outsiders be jealous, but they would also make up a rumor that Mi Chu seduced men with her beauty and took advantage of the situation. Once such a rumor spread, Mi Chu's reputation would never be cleared. No matter how well she did, people would still gossip about her. There would always be people who would use the most malicious words to slander her, saying that her power, status, achievements, and glory were all obtained from the Lord through her beauty. Only in this way could those petty people quell the jealousy in their hearts and absolve themselves of being useless and useless. If Mi Chu was a man, that would be even more incredible. Wouldn't the rumors about his lord, who had been neglected for a long time, be spread like wildfire? Oh, that didn't seem quite right. His lord had put many people in an important position right from the start, and there didn't seem to be many scandals. This had always been an unsolved mystery. His lord was a female vassal, so why didn't people talk about scandals as if they were blind? Feng Zhen said, "Scandals." Chapter 17:12. As long as it didn't involve any conspiracy, Jiang Pingji's actions were honorable. Thus, the news of her appointing Mi Chu spread like wildfire throughout the Nanjing aristocrat circle. Who was Mi Chu? Investigate. Even after more than 10 years of war, the aristocrats of Nanjing were greatly weakened, but a starving camel was still bigger than a horse. If they wanted to investigate a person, the news would be as fast as a galloping horse. Moreover, Mi Chu was born into an aristocrat family and was famous when she was young. Many people had heard of her name and recognized her. Mi Chu was a famous talented girl when she was young. Her late husband was also a famous talented scholar. They were a famous golden couple. Later, her late husband died of illness and Mi Chu became a widow. After a few years of silence, her presence gradually faded. Some people vaguely remembered the interesting things that happened between her and her late husband when they were young, but they didn't know that she was forced to remarry. No one could have imagined that the name Mi Liang would be mentioned once again. It wasn't because of her talent and beauty, nor was it because she was someone's wife, but because she was Mi Liang, a woman who was given such a heavy responsibility right after she was conscripted. After digging deeper, outsiders found out that so many things had happened to her. Some people praised her as a role model for the legitimate wife, because as the first wife, she managed her husband's backyard in an orderly manner. She had a harmonious relationship with her wife and concubines, and she could earn money to support the family. As her husband, he didn't have to worry about anything and only needed to eat, drink, and be merry at home. Some people criticized her as a traitor. When the aristocrats of Nanjing tacitly rejected the recruitment order, she didn't know how to avoid arousing suspicion. She forgot her pride as an aristocrat for the sake of some glory and wealth. She wagged her tail at an outsider and begged. It was extremely laughable. Some people criticized her for being a sissy and inverting yin and yang. A rebellious woman like Jiang Pingji would be destroyed sooner or later. Mi Chu had been well-read since she was young, yet she didn't understand the principles of yin and yang. Instead, she learned from Jiang Pingji and rebelled. Wasn't she afraid of angering her ancestors? Of course, although these people criticized her verbally, they were actually jealous in their hearts. According to the current situation, no one could stop Jiang Pingji's footsteps to rule the world. Whoever helped her would have the credit of founding the country. Mi Qian's ancestors were lucky enough to be able to get this opportunity. These people probably said that the grapes were sour because they couldn't eat them. Their mouths were chattering, but their hearts were filled with jealousy. Soon, they found Mi Chu's current husband. She had thought that even if her second husband was worse than her first husband, it wouldn't be by much. This man is really lucky. With such a wife, he really doesn't have to do anything. If he were to marry a wife like Miku, it wouldn't be 30 years less of hard work, it would be 3 lifetimes less of hard work. Thus, some of his friends who heard the news came over to say sour words, while others took the opportunity to make friends. Perhaps they would need each other's help in the future. Mi Qian's husband thought that he had struck it rich. Even the person who was usually cold to him was talking to him, he couldn't help but feel a little smug. Later on, the more he listened, the more he felt that something was wrong. Only after asking did he find out that Mi Chu had been placed in an important position right after he was subjugated. Knowing this, Mi Chu's husband became a little distracted. His ears were filled with the admiration and flattery of others, as well as the flattery of Mi Chu. There were even some people who secretly mocked him for being raised by his wife, saying that he was no different from a son-in-law who married into the family. He was furious, but he couldn't say anything to refute. He could only swallow his anger and not dare to utter a word. What could he do? If he had the capital to be arrogant, he would throw a divorce letter to Mi Chu right now and everyone would go their separate ways. That way, no one would mock him for being useless and living off a woman because of Mi Chu. But the truth was, he didn't have the guts to do so, and his parents wouldn't allow him to do so. Not to mention putting this idea into action, even if he said it out loud, his parents would still press him down in front of his ancestors and break his legs. The world was big, but nothing was more important than the family's glory and inheritance. The son they gave birth to was disappointing, but at least the daughter-in-law they married was capable, so how could they let such a good daughter-in-law go? After being bored for 2 days, he packed his things and went to find Mi Chu, completely forgetting that he still had a meal of bamboo scrolls to eat. What are you doing here? Mi Chu had just arrived in Ningzhou, and this was the first time she met her lord, Jiang Pingji. After exchanging a few pleasantries, she was given a bunch of tasks. She was so busy that she felt dizzy. When she finally managed to find some time to return home to rest, the servants reported that her husband had come again. Isn't it all because of you? I can't stay at home anymore. Seeking refuge with Mi Chu was naturally for the sake of peace and quiet. Mi Chu rolled her eyes and ignored him. She hurriedly finished her lunch and prepared to seize the time to rest for a while. Her husband asked, "Don't you have anything to say?" Mi Chu yawned, feeling sleepy, and asked casually. "Say what?" Her husband said, something like a divorce. You studied and became an official, isn't it all for this day? As the weaker party, he really couldn't do anything when Mi Chu proposed a divorce. After all, Mi Chu's current backer was Jiang Pingji. Mi Chu frowned. "Who's talking nonsense in your ear?" Her husband said, "I just feel that this day will come sooner or later." Mi Chu smiled. "Divorce isn't that difficult, so why would you think that I'm doing all I can to become an official just to separate from you? I became an official because I'm a woman. What men can do, I can also do. The purpose of a woman's life isn't to marry and bear children, but to be trapped in the backyard for the rest of her life. I became an official so that I can stand as tall as men, or even taller than them. Otherwise, what do you think? Having achieved a small part of her wish, Michu was in a good mood and didn't hide her ambition at all. Isn't that even more reason to separate? What's the point of following such a useless man? Why don't you find someone who can help you? Michu was silent for a moment, then she said, I'm very afraid of thunder. Her husband's expression froze, revealing a bit of uneasiness. Michu's parents passed away on a dark night of spring thunder, while her first husband passed away on a summer afternoon of drought and thunder. Normally, Michu's expression wouldn't change even if Mdtai collapsed in front of her, but when it came to thunder, she would tremble in fear. Her current husband was truly a scumbag, but even the scumbag had some bright spots. For example, he accidentally found out that Michu was afraid of thunder, so every time there was a thunderstorm, regardless of whether he was sleeping in his concubine's room or having a banquet outside, he would always rush back to accompany her. It was because of these small bright spots that Michu tolerated him. No matter how scumbag he was still her husband in name, half a relative. She really didn't want to return to being alone. After her husband passed away, she was truly alone and helpless as a widow. The scene of her so-called relatives forcing her to marry someone else was still vivid in her mind. Divorce? Perhaps in the future, but it wasn't urgent right now. At the very least, she had to wait until she had her own bloodline before kicking him aside. This man was a scumbag in every other aspect, but his face was truly good-looking, as pleasing to the eye as a room full of concubines. After this conversation, the two of them didn't talk about divorce and returned to their usual lifestyle. Chapter 17:13. Sigh, why didn't I realize that there were so many things to do in the past? Jiang Pingji looked at the official work piled up on her desk and sighed softly. She looked like she had nothing to live for. Her work efficiency was high, but she didn't see it decrease after being busy for so long. The most despairing thing was that she couldn't see the end of these days. She really wanted to overturn them all. Nanxing can't be compared to Dongqing. Dongqing has been governed by my lord for so many years and has a set of regulations. Many trivial matters don't bother my lord. However, Nanqing's decade-long war has just ended. Everything is being done everywhere. It's normal for them to be busy. After being busy for a while, when Nanqing's post-war construction was on the right track, there would be much less things that needed Jiang Pingji's personal instructions. Wei Xi patiently comforted her with a faint smile on his lips. Just looking at him made her feel like her mood was improving. Jiang Pingji was just complaining. She stopped after a few words. It's fine if you're busy, but you keep taking up my time alone with Zixiao. That's what makes me angry. I tricked Xiaoyin into giving me this time. Wei Xi's mouth twitched uncontrollably when he heard that. Even though Lu Jing had just joined, he seemed to have been infected by Yang Xi and the rest. He had a terrible obsession with the young lord who was nowhere to be found. Jiang Pingji was also clever. She used the young lord as a shield and tricked Lu Jing into taking care of many trivial matters. If Lu Jing and the rest knew that their lord had been using contraception and that it was impossible to have a young lord, they might vomit blood out of anger. Don't let Xiaoyin hear this. If he hears it, he'll go all out and fight you. Yang Xi and the rest were loyal to Jiang Pingji, but Jiang Pingji was merciless when it came to tricking them. Wei Xi, who was familiar with the inside story, watched their interaction. He often felt guilty as if he was helping a tyrant do evil. Jiang Pingji smiled. I'm a very cautious person. Zixiao, you still don't believe me. Wei Xi was speechless. How was this something to be proud of? Believe it or not, Yang Xifeng and the rest would cry in front of her. This Michu is really something. She actually managed to get Jing Rong and Zi Shi to put in a good word for her. You should know that those two are the most difficult to deal with and also the hardest to please. Jiang Pingji read and saw the message Yang Si sent over. Not only was there a work report, but there were also praises for Mi Yu. Besides Yang Si, Feng Zhen had also put in a good word for Mi Yu. Not only did they affirm Mi Yu's character and talent, they also affirmed her ability. These two were not people who were easy to get along with. It was extremely difficult for an outsider to grasp their pulse, let alone curry favor with them. It was rare for them to take the initiative to speak up for someone. Jiang Pingji had known them for so many years. She could count on 5 hands the number of people who had the ability to make them like her to the max. Wei Ci said, "This is not an accident." Back in her previous life, when Miko was in the bureaucracy, she was hated by many. Even though no one dared to speak against her openly, there were definitely many people who cursed her to die in secret. She was hated and cursed by so many people, yet she could still live peacefully. How could she do that without some ability? With her abilities, it wasn't as difficult as she had imagined to increase Gao Yangxi and Feng Zhen's favorability. Jiang Pingji smiled and said, "I have even more expectations for her. I hope she won't disappoint me." Wei Ci said, "My lord means," he frowned slightly, realizing that something was not quite right. Listening to what his lord meant, she wanted to promote Mi Yu to a higher position. Thinking of this, Wei Ci did not quite agree. According to Mi Yu's ability, she could use facts to convince everyone. It was only a matter of time before she reached the height of her previous life. His lord seemed to want to spoil things by pushing them from behind. Wouldn't this have the opposite effect? "We have Nongqin in the military, but we still lack one in the civil field," Jiang Pingji said. "I lack a woman like Mi Yu." She appeared at the right time. There was no lack of outstanding women around her, but these women were seriously biased towards subjects. The female generals, led by Jiang Nongqin, had barely managed to gain a foothold, but the civil field had yet to be developed. Wei Ci said, "Isn't there a lady from the Wei family?" He reminded his lord that Wei Jingxian had followed her husband Feng Jin and helped her for many years. She could not forget her just because her presence was low. Jiang Pingji said, "It's not that I haven't considered Jingxian, but her temperament is on the soft side. She's not aggressive and doesn't have enough ambition. Bai Yuexia is not bad either." Jiang Pingji said, I have special arrangements for her. She just needs to be engrossed in her studies and not get involved in those messy fights." Wei Jingxian was not bad, but her temperament and family background meant that she was more inclined to be conservative. Without ambition, how could she have the motivation to advance? Without aggressiveness, how could she demonstrate to the enemy and show her strength? If she couldn't do that, then she was not the person she wanted. Bai Yuexia was not bad either. According to Wei Ci, her future achievements would not be low. However, there were specializations in different fields. Bai Yuexia was from the Mahests, so her battlefield was not the court. Jiang Pingji also did not want Bai Yuexia to focus on that. What she needed was a benchmark so that the world could look at the achievements and status that women could achieve in the political arena through this benchmark. Jiang Nongqin was a martial artist, Wei Jingxian was too gentle, Bai Yuexia was partial to subjects. As for the others, they either lacked experience or talent. They could not become the most important chess pieces in Jiang Pingji's hands. Just when she was at her wit's end, Mi Chu appeared. Even if Mi Chu looked harmless, Jiang Pingji could see that her eyes were filled with desire and ambition for power. What was more precious was that Mi Chu had the ability to match her ambition. The timing of Mi Chu's appearance was just right. Therefore, Jiang Pingji planned to set Mi Chu as an important benchmark for women in the court. The women of the world would look up to her. Only when the civil and military complemented each other can they truly stand firm in the court. With them, the world would not look down on women as they used to. Wei Ci understood Jiang Pingji's intention after thinking for a while. In that case, Mi Chu is indeed the most suitable candidate. Jiang Pingji said to Wei Ci honestly, I think so, but whether or not she can grasp the opportunity depends on Mi Chu herself. If she can be supported, I will naturally work hard to cultivate her. If she is a useless person who can't be supported, I will not force her. After all, supporting an unworthy benchmark would not only be unsatisfactory, but it would also easily lead to a backlash. Wei Ci said, My lord's plans are far-reaching. You will definitely achieve what you want. Jiang Pingji smiled and said, Zixiao's words are still so in line with my thoughts. Because Jiang Pingji was obsessed with work, the idle people expressed that the content of the recent live stream was a little boring and they were a little tired of watching it. Fortunately, the idle people still had a fountain of happiness, dream of 1,000 years of luck. Chapter 17:14. I love dreams of 1,000 years, I'm rubbing my hands in excitement. Now it's the most exciting time of the week. Even though dreams of 1,000 years had been around for many years and the number of lucky people had exceeded 3 digits, it did not diminish their enthusiasm. Dreams of 1,000 years only happened once a week, and there was only one slot each time. There were more than 10 billion people in 2 dimensions. On the day of the lucky draw, it was much harder to get a slot in the streaming room than usual. Even the big shots who bought houses in the streaming room often failed. Getting a slot in the streaming room was just getting the right to the lucky draw. The streaming room would choose the chosen one from 5 million people. Every chosen one was the most dazzling existence among billions of people. Their luck was off the charts. It was harder than winning a lottery ticket worth hundreds of millions. Count of 1,000 faces, after all the chaos, I finally made it in. It's my first time getting a slot in the streaming room in half a year. I'm crying my heart out. Dang Zhan Hezing Fei, it's time for the lucky draw. I feel more excited than being a groom on this day. Guren Rugio, look, this lucky person is of pure European descent. He's fair and beautiful. Why don't we roast him? Yuan Chu Tianfen, I'm curious about the identity of the lucky person this time. Is it possible for him to meet the streamer? Yubin Baobo, it's basically impossible. I've been following the dreams of 1,000 years for so many years, and so far only 3 people have achieved this. According to the statistics of the big shots, only 3 of the 3-digit lucky emperors had ever been in the same frame as Jiang Pingji. There were less than 20 lucky emperors who had direct or indirect contact with celebrities in this dimension. The rest of the lucky emperors had basically transmigrated for half a day and traveled to ancient times before returning. They traveled through time with various identities, and the real identities of the lucky people were also varied. There was basically no pattern to it. It was impossible to predict who the lucky person was this week and what identity he had traveled through time. It was precisely because of this unknown that dreams of 1,000 years became more interesting and exciting. Every time the lucky draw was held, the lurking idle people would jump out. The increase in the bullet screen in the streaming room was in the tens of thousands. Jiang Pingji glanced at the screen from the corner of her eyes when she was dealing with the official documents. The lucky draw result popped up on the screen. Congratulations to the number 1 playboy of the capital city for winning the slot of Dreams of 1,000 Years. Seeing this result, the bullet screen in the live broadcast room seemed to have stopped for 3 seconds, followed by countless question marks. Mudfish, excuse me. Who? How could such a person have the chance to transmigrate? Jiang Pingji frowned, wondering why Salted Fish's reaction was so strange. In the next second, a kind-hearted person explained it to her. It turned out that this, capital's number 1 playboy, was a young master from a rich and powerful family. He had never committed any crimes, but he was a scumbag. The number of girlfriends he had dated could form a group, and many of them had even had abortions for him. The year before last, he obeyed his parents' arrangement and got married. The girl's family background was far inferior to his, so she couldn't control him at all. This young master was even more fearless. The red flag at home was still standing, but the colorful flags were fluttering outside. Every now and then, there would be mistresses, fourths, and fifths tearing up nameless gossips. What really made this young master famous was the gossip from last month. The 81st-year female celebrity who failed to become a 6th-year celebrity was tearing up a Playboy on Weibo. The female celebrity also revealed a piece of gossip that infuriated the netizens. The young master was having an affair with the female celebrity the day before his wife gave birth. His wife gave birth to a daughter 2 months ago, but he didn't go back to see her a few times. He even privately mocked his wife for being pretentious with the female celebrity. It only took a few hours for a woman to give birth. Others could walk as if they were flying the next day, but she was pretentious and had to stay in the hospital for 2 months. The young master liked the new and got tired of the old. Soon, he got tired of the female celebrity and wanted to break up. The female celebrity wanted more benefits, but the young master refused. The two of them broke down. How could the female celebrity be willing? The young master had only fulfilled half of the resources he had promised to give her. There was still the other half. The young master was impatient with the woman who didn't know what was good for her. He was annoyed by her pestering, so he decided to freeze her. The female celebrity was just an 81st-tier celebrity in the entertainment industry. Freezing her was something the young master could do with just a word. The female celebrity was also angry. Once she was angry, she decided to perish together with the young master. She gritted her teeth and made up her mind. She simply revealed on Weibo that she was tearing up the young master. Let's not talk about whether this move of hers was rational, or if she thought of it with her feet, but her generosity made the netizens eat their fill. For a week, all kinds of skinning, all kinds of reversals, and all kinds of high energy filled the emptiness of countless night owls. The female celebrity also revealed the audio recording, which completely crushed the young master. He couldn't even clear his name. The power of the netizens was strong. Soon, the young master's family and social media accounts were all exposed. When they were exposing him, they also found the young master's account in the live broadcast room. Unexpectedly, the young master was also a loyal fan of the live broadcast room, even though it was black. What was more coincidental was that his account ID was #1 Playboy. Yinwu Kwangsha, letting such a scumbag transmigrate is giving him a chance to go to ancient times to play with women. Green fairy tales, maybe he's a man in a woman's clothes. It's still uncertain whether he will be beaten or not. Meixiang as before, this guy can become a European emperor. I feel as disgusted as eating a fly. The young master didn't care about these sour comments. He happily announced the result on Weibo, with a face full of sarcasm for the masses of salted fish. His matter was a big deal on the internet. It was trending every day, and he was almost the model of a modern scumbag. He didn't care. After all, the netizens' criticism and sour comments couldn't affect his real life. While the netizens were eating instant noodles and denouncing him, he still drove a luxury car, lived in a mansion, and slept with the woman they yearned for day and night but couldn't have. Now, it was even worse. The 1 in a billion chance of becoming a European emperor had fallen into his hands. What was this called? Not only was he rich, powerful, and handsome, but he also had luck. God had really opened his eyes. When the young master was transmigrating in his dream, the resentment in the live broadcast room almost condensed into a substance. Many of the salted fish complained that they didn't want to watch the live broadcast because they felt disgusted. In the end, the law of Wang Jing told us that the more you swore, the easier it was to be slapped in the face. Xinxiang might be late, but she would never be absent. Jiang Pingji's curiosity was aroused by the salted fish's resentment. She opened the interface of the European Emperor's live broadcast room, then, and 666 filled every corner of the screen. She temporarily turned off the bullet screen and looked at the content on the screen in silence for 2 seconds. The identity of the European Emperor who had transmigrated was a bit tricky. The European Emperor's wish to go to ancient times to pick up ancient beauties was not going to happen. Chapter 1715. Yedongwu, it's so easy for a woman to give birth. It's as easy as taking a dump. Am I right, lucky emperor? Xiao Zhuer, my dear, children born naturally are smarter. Just bear with it. How can a man be more afraid of pain than your wife and mother? She was giving birth to a child, but she was screaming like a pig being slaughtered. If she were to howl like this now, she would run out of energy later. Come a cup of iced coal, the lucky queen is indeed a happy fountain. I was so desperate just now that I wanted to turn off the live broadcast room. I didn't expect. I didn't expect this guy to become a pregnant woman in labor. Oh my, I know it's wrong to gloat, but allow me to be happy first before I repent. Don't you think this pile of sh*t is so thick that you can't poop it out? The famous online quote of Capital's #1 Playboy was, "Giving birth is like taking a dump." Women who say that it hurts are all pretentious. My mother's generation didn't have so many problems. She even said that she didn't want to give birth. If she doesn't give me a son, she'll get lost. These words not only angered all the female netizens, but even the male netizens felt ashamed that there was such an idiot among the men. It's easy for you to say that. If you have the ability, go and experience it first. In the end, Luck won the bid. He was fortunate enough to stand out from the millions of people and become the new king of luck, obtaining the qualification to experience the birth of a pregnant woman in ancient times. When he first crossed over, he felt a little dizzy, and his whole body seemed to be drained of energy. A wave of unbearable pain spread from his lower body to his whole body. As his consciousness cleared, the pain he felt became more and more intense. In the end, he couldn't take it anymore and tried to grab the source of the pain with his hands. As soon as he did so, his palm came into contact with her plump and taut belly, a round and tight stomach. When he realized this, the European king shivered, and his consciousness was completely awakened. He found the body in a half-sitting position on the bed, with 2 white, slender, well-proportioned legs spread wide. Lucky King looked down and realized that his round belly was blocking his view. Even if they hadn't eaten pork before, they would have seen pigs run. This posture was clearly a common production joke in period dramas. His first reaction was to beat his stomach with his hand. What kind of lousy transmigration was this? Who wanted to give birth to a child? However, the condition of this body was not very good. His actions did not affect the child in any way. Instead, it caused an even more intense contractions, causing him to wail and howl in pain. At this time, a middle-aged woman who looked like a midwife said hurriedly, "Dear, don't waste your energy now. Your baby is too big, and the delivery time is not right. If you do as I say, you will definitely be able to give birth safely." Before the European emperor could retort, the midwife ordered someone to stuff something into his mouth to prevent him from biting his tongue in pain. At the same time, she ordered 2 strong female servants to prop him up in a half-squat position. She explained, "I've delivered babies for at least 1,000 times. Many farmers' wives will squat like this to ensure that the delivery goes smoothly. This way, they can use their strength. Please take a break and gather your strength. When there's movement later, muster up all your strength to give birth to the child. Just follow this servant's instructions and use all your strength. Therefore, the European emperor was forced by a house full of servants, maids, and midwives. No, he was forced to give birth. However, it was not easy to give birth to a child. Before the European emperor arrived, the pregnant woman had already used up most of her strength. She was in so much pain that she lost consciousness. It seemed that both of them were going to die soon. The European emperor's arrival injected new vitality into this body, and it was enough for the European emperor to hold on until the delivery of the child. This body would probably be very grateful for the European emperor's efforts, but the European emperor himself, he cursed crazily in his heart, but his body was held down by the female servants who mistook it for pain. For the first time, the European emperor saw how terrifying the strength of a woman who had been doing rough labor all year round could be. The two of them held him on both sides, and he could not move an inch no matter how hard he struggled. His stomach was in pain, and his lower body felt like it was being cut by a knife. This process was worse than death for him. Seeing that the European emperor was a little depressed, the midwife immediately encouraged him with words. The earlier he gave birth, the less pain he would suffer. If he didn't give birth soon, the child would definitely die. The European emperor cried and cursed crazily at the same time. He almost crushed the food in his mouth with his teeth. He thought that he could end the pain by exerting force, but he did not expect that the delivery process would be so long. The feeling of being cut by a knife was still with him. Because he was a lucky emperor, the system had a protective mechanism for lucky emperors. Therefore, it was wishful thinking for him to faint from the pain. Yueying, I know it's painful for a pregnant woman to give birth. I should give my blessings to such a serious scene, but I really can't help it. Once I thought about how the soul of this body was that scumbag guy, I couldn't help but laugh out loud as I watched the stream from under my blanket. Old man sigh, this pile of sh*t is too thick. Will the lucky emperor be traumatized for life? Liang 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 would be best if he couldn't lift it for the rest of his life and didn't harm innocent girls. After all, Lucky Emperor was a fountain that brought them joy. Although the salted fishes mocked him, they didn't go overboard. However, the Lucky King was still a hit. The live broadcast room was the only program that people around the world paid attention to. It was equivalent to Lucky Emperor making a name for himself on this global platform. In the future, whoever mentioned him and saw him, their first impression would be, oh, so he's that scumbag who live-streamed giving birth to a child. The salted fishes were as happy as if they were celebrating the new year. In an instant, the related hot searches once again dominated the entire screen, and the server crashed. Having experienced countless battles, big and small, the face of the coder monkey, who thought he was experienced in battles, darkened. Jiang Pingji asked someone to bring her a plate of melon seeds. Every time Lucky Emperor squinted his eyes in pain and howled in pain, then his entire face contorted, she would bite a melon seed. Therefore, as soon as Wei Ci came in, he heard his lord crunching melon seeds, and the corners of her lips curled into a happy smile. Wei Ci asked, "Is there a happy occasion, my lord?" Jiang Pingji smiled and said, "I just heard that Xichang's princess is finally going to give birth." Wei Ci's expression was surprised. It seemed that he didn't expect Xichang's princess to not give birth yet. Calculating the time, it should have been more than half a month, right? The timing isn't right. Xichang's princess was Enchui's concubine. The child in her womb was his posthumous child. His lord wanted to use the mother and child to show her benevolence. Regardless of whether it was Xichang's princess or the child, nothing could happen to either of them. There was most likely a problem if the child was born so late. Jiang Pingji said, "Who knows? Anyway, I've done my best." You're tuning in to the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.